I have replayed those 10 minutes so many times that I can still see every detail as clearly as if I were standing beneath those fluorescent lights again. I remember the weight of the grocery bags cutting into my fingers, the automatic doors opening and closing, and the warm smell of cinnamon drifting from the bakery near the entrance. I remember checking the parking lot for our navy blue SUV and telling myself that Eric would appear at any second. What I did not understand then was that those 10 minutes would divide my life into two separate parts the 19 years before I learned the truth and everything that came after. Until that Saturday, I believed I knew my husband better than I knew anyone else in the world. Eric and I had been married for 19 years. We were not the kind of couple who attracted attention at restaurants or posted romantic photographs every week. Our marriage had never depended on grand gestures, expensive surprises, or dramatic declarations of love. What we had was quieter than that. It was built through habits, responsibilities, private jokes, and the thousands of ordinary choices that made two people feel like a single team. We had survived the difficult years at the beginning of our marriage, when every unexpected bill felt like a crisis, and we sometimes had to choose which payment could wait until the next paycheck. We had moved 3 times before finally buying our house. We had cared for my mother during the final year of her illness, sleeping in shifts and pretending not to be afraid when the doctors stopped offering hopeful answers. Eric had held me in the hospital hallway after she died and promised that I would never have to face anything alone. I believed him. There had been disappointments, arguments, and long periods when life felt more exhausting than romantic. Eric lost his job once when the financial company he worked for downsized without warning. I spent nearly a year accepting every design project I could find while he rebuilt his career. Later, when my own business struggled, he reminded me that one difficult season did not define a lifetime. We had made mistakes, but we had always returned to each other. That was how I understood our marriage. Not perfect, but dependable. Not exciting every day, but safe. Saturday mornings belonged to us. We had followed the same routine for so many years that neither of us needed to discuss it anymore. We woke without an alarm, made coffee in the kitchen, and stood near the window while we decided whether the weather was good enough for the farmer's market. Eric always claimed that he could taste the difference between locally grown tomatoes and supermarket tomatoes. I always told him he was imagining it. He would buy them anyway. And I would use them in dinner because that was part of the ritual. After the market, we drove to Riverside Market on Elm Street for the rest of the groceries. It was a large store with wide aisles, polished floors, and a bakery that made the entire entrance smell like cinnamon and butter. We had been shopping there since before we bought our house. Over the years, we had learned which checkout lines moved fastest, which employee always crushed the bread, and which weekends the produce section was almost empty by noon. That morning seemed no different from any other. Eric wore the gray Henley shirt I had given him for his birthday 2 years earlier. The sleeves were pushed halfway up his forearms, and his hair was still slightly damp from the shower. He looked familiar in the deepest possible sense, not merely like someone I recognized, but like someone whose presence had become part of the structure of my life. In the cereal aisle, he deliberately reached for the wrong brand of coffee. "You know that one tastes like burnt cardboard," I said. He looked at the package with exaggerated seriousness. "Maybe my standards have changed. After 19 years. People grow, Stephanie. Put it back." He laughed and returned it to the shelf. Then he leaned over and kissed my forehead. It was such a small gesture that I barely reacted. He had kissed me that way hundreds of times before leaving for work while passing behind me in the kitchen when I was reading on the sofa, and he wanted my attention. That morning I simply smiled and continued pushing the cart. Later I would think about that kiss more than I wanted to. I would wonder whether affection could still be real when it existed beside deception. I would ask myself whether he had kissed me because he loved me because he felt guilty, or simply because the gesture had become so automatic that it required no feeling at all. At the time, however, I suspected nothing. We moved through the store as we always did. Eric collected items that were not on the list. I removed half of them when he was not looking. He complained that I never allowed him to be spontaneous, and I reminded him that buying 3 different kinds of mustard was not spontaneity. We debated what to cook on Sunday. He suggested steak. I suggested pasta. We compromised by buying both. It was ordinary, comfortable, forgettable. That is the cruelest thing about the moments that change your life. They do not announce themselves. There is no shift in the light, no warning in the air, no voice telling you to pay closer attention. They often begin inside the most familiar version of your world. We reached the checkout line shortly after 11. The store was becoming crowded. A family behind us was trying to distract a crying toddler with a box of crackers. An elderly couple ahead of us argued gently over whether a coupon had expired. Somewhere near the bakery, a metal tray hit the floor, followed by an employee's embarrassed apology. Eric checked his phone. His expression changed only slightly, but I noticed his mouth tighten before he slipped the device back into his pocket. "What is it?" I asked. "The Whitmore account," he said. "It's becoming a complete disaster." I knew the name, or at least I believed I did. Eric had mentioned Whitmore several times over the previous month, usually with the weary tone he reserved for demanding clients. He worked as a financial consultant, and calls outside normal business hours were not unusual. Clients who trusted him with large amounts of money rarely respected weekends. He touched my elbow and leaned closer. "I need to take this outside. 10 minutes at most." "Go," I said. "I can finish here." "You sure?" "It's groceries, Eric. I think I can handle the pressure." He smiled, squeezed my arm, and walked toward the exit. I watched him disappear through the automatic doors. Then the cashier asked whether I wanted paper or plastic, and my attention returned to the conveyor belt. I paid, packed the groceries, and checked the time. 5 minutes had passed. I moved to the area near the exit and balanced the bags against my legs. Through the glass doors, I could see rows of cars shining beneath the pale morning sun. Our SUV was parked several rows away, but I could not see Eric beside it. I assumed he was pacing while he talked. He often moved when a conversation became complicated. At home, he walked from room to room during difficult calls, opening cabinets without taking anything out, and staring through windows as though the solution might appear outside. Another few minutes passed. I shifted the bags from one hand to the other and checked my phone. No message. 10 minutes. The first trace of unease was so small that I almost dismissed it. It was not fear, not yet. It was simply the awareness that something had taken longer than promised. I told myself the call had become complicated. Perhaps Eric had returned to the car because the store was too noisy. Perhaps he had stepped around the side of the building to find privacy. Perhaps I had simply missed him walking past. I considered going outside, but the bags were heavy, and I did not want to carry them across the parking lot unnecessarily. 12 minutes. A woman pushed a cart past me, smiling apologetically when one of the wheels nearly struck my ankle. The automatic doors opened again, sending a brief wave of warm air across my face. 14 minutes. I called Eric. The phone rang several times before going to voicemail. I looked toward the parking lot again more carefully now. Our SUV remained where we had left it. No one stood beside it. No figure paced between the cars. 15 minutes. That was when Frank approached me. I recognized him, though we had never had a real conversation. He was an older employee with silver hair and a careful way of moving. His green vest carried a laminated badge that read, "Frank, 22 years." I had seen him restocking shelves and helping elderly customers reach products from the highest racks. He always seemed patient, almost formal, as though every small task deserved his full attention. That morning he did not look patient. He looked uncertain. He stopped a few feet from me and glanced toward the checkout lanes before speaking. "Mom." "Yes." "Are you waiting for the gentleman you came in with?" The question caught me off guard. "My husband," I said. "Yes." He stepped outside to take a call. Frank looked toward the doors, then back at me. For a moment I thought he might tell me that Eric had fallen or that there had been an accident in the parking lot. My fingers tightened around the handles of the bags. "Is something wrong?" I asked. Frank cleared his throat. "I think you should come with me." My mind immediately searched for an ordinary explanation. "Is there a problem with my payment?" "No, ma'am." "Did I leave something at the register?" "No." He did not elaborate. He gestured toward a hallway beside the pharmacy counter, where a gray door displayed an employees-only sign. I gave a nervous laugh. "I'm sorry, I don't understand." "I know," he said quietly. "But I think it would be better if I showed you." Something in his expression ended my questions. It was not the face of a man enjoying private information or looking for drama. It was the face of someone who had spent time deciding whether to interfere and had finally concluded that silence would be worse. I followed him. The grocery bags were still hanging from my arms. I remember that clearly because the detail felt absurd even then. I was walking into a restricted hallway with milk, vegetables, pasta, and a loaf of bread pressing against my wrists as though whatever waited behind that door would be easier to face if I continued holding the ingredients for our dinner. Frank opened the door to a small security office. The room was crowded with filing cabinets, cardboard boxes, and a desk covered in paperwork. One wall held several monitors displaying black and white footage from different areas of the store. Shoppers moved silently through the aisles. Employees pushed carts through storage rooms. Cars entered and left the parking lot. Frank pulled out a chair for me. I did not sit. "What happened?" I asked. He lowered himself into the chair at the desk and moved the computer mouse. His fingers were steady, but his shoulders were tense. "Before I show you this, I want you to know I wasn't trying to involve myself in something personal." My heartbeat began to quicken. "Show me what?" He did not answer immediately. He searched through recorded footage, selected a camera, and rewound the video. "Your husband has been coming here for a long time, hasn't he?" "We both have." "I thought so." "Frank, please?" He pressed play. The footage showed a service corridor near the back of the store. I had never seen it before. There were stacked boxes along one wall, a metal door marked loading area, and a narrow passage leading toward the storage rooms. For several seconds, nothing happened. Then Eric entered the frame. My first feeling was relief. There he was. He had not been injured. Nothing terrible had happened. That relief lasted less than a second. A woman stepped into view from the opposite side of the corridor. She appeared to be in her mid-40s with dark blonde hair that fell just past her shoulders. She wore dark trousers and a fitted blazer clothing that seemed too formal for a Saturday morning at a grocery store. I had never seen her before. At least I was certain I had never met her. Eric stopped in front of her. They stood close enough that their conversation was clearly private. The camera had no sound, but I could see the woman speaking quickly. Eric listened with an expression I knew well, the serious, concentrated look he used when discussing money or solving a difficult problem. They did not kiss. They did not embrace. There was no obvious display of affection that would have allowed me to name what I was seeing without hesitation. Yet the familiarity between them was unmistakable. The woman reached out and placed her hand lightly on Eric's forearm. It remained there for only a moment before she removed it, but the gesture was natural, unplanned, and comfortable. Eric did not step away. He leaned toward her as she spoke, lowering his head as though they had stood like this many times before. Then she handed him something. The object looked like a folded document or a thin envelope. Eric glanced down at it and slipped it beneath his jacket. My mouth became dry. "Who is she?" I asked. Frank shook his head. "I don't know her name." "Did they come in together?" "No." "Did you see them leave?" "Not yet." I continued watching. The woman said something else. Eric nodded. She touched his arm once more, then walked toward the loading area. He remained in the corridor for another minute, looking at the object she had given him. After that, he left in the direction of the front entrance. The footage ended. For several seconds, I heard nothing but the soft electrical hum of the monitors. "This is the first time you've seen them?" I asked. Frank looked at me, and the answer was visible in his face before he spoke. "No, ma'am." I stared at him. "How many times?" "I can't say exactly. A few times over the past couple of months. Maybe more." "And you're certain it was my husband?" "Yes." The grocery bags suddenly felt unbearably heavy. I set them on the floor beside the chair. "Why would they meet back there?" "I don't know." "Is she an employee?" "No." "A supplier?" "Not that I'm aware of." "Then how does she get into that corridor?" Frank hesitated. "The side door near the loading area doesn't always latch properly. We've reported it more than once." I looked back at the frozen image on the monitor. Eric stood with his face turned toward the woman, his body angled close to hers. The picture contained no undeniable evidence of an affair, and yet every instinct I had told me I was looking at something intimate, not necessarily romantic, but secret. That distinction did not comfort me. "Why did you tell me?" I asked. Frank leaned back in the chair and folded his hands. "My wife died 3 years ago," he said. "Before that, there were things happening in our family that people knew about and didn't tell her. They thought they were protecting her. Maybe they thought it wasn't their business." He looked at the monitors rather than at me. "She found out eventually. People usually do. But by then she'd lost time she could have used to make her own decisions. I always wished someone had respected her enough to tell her sooner." His voice remained controlled, but something tightened around his eyes. "When I saw you waiting out there, I thought you deserved the chance to know what was happening around you." I wanted to tell him he was mistaken. I wanted to say that Eric was probably helping a client with something confidential, that there was a reasonable explanation for the hidden corridor, the separate arrival, the hand on his arm, and the envelope beneath his jacket. I wanted to protect the man I had known for 19 years from the meaning of what I had just seen. Instead, I heard myself say thank you. The words sounded distant and strangely polite. Frank stood and handed me the grocery bags. "I'm sorry," he said. I nodded because I did not trust myself to speak again. When I walked out of the security office, the store looked exactly as it had before. Customers compared labels, children complained, employees restocked shelves. The smell of cinnamon still drifted from the bakery. No one seemed to notice that the world had tilted. I passed the checkout lanes and stepped through the automatic doors. Eric was standing beside our SUV. He leaned casually against the driver's door with his phone in one hand. When he saw me, he straightened and smiled. "There you are," he said. "I was about to come looking for you." I stopped several feet away from him. For one dangerous second, I thought I might ask him everything. I imagined dropping the bags onto the pavement and demanding the woman's name. I imagined watching his face as I described the corridor, the envelope, and the way she had touched his arm. Then he stepped forward and took the bags from me. "Sorry that took so long," he said. "Whitmore is a nightmare. The man doesn't listen to a word I say, and then he calls me when everything goes wrong." The lie was smooth, effortless, detailed enough to sound true. He leaned over and kissed my cheek. I smiled. I do not know how I managed it. Perhaps shock gave me control. Perhaps some part of me understood that if I confronted him before I understood what I had seen, I would only receive another lie. Whatever the reason, I heard myself say, I figured the call became complicated. "You have no idea." He opened the passenger door for me. During the drive home, Eric talked about the Whitmore account. He explained a tax issue, complained about missing documents, and described a conversation that almost certainly had never happened. His voice was relaxed. He even laughed once. I responded at the appropriate moments. I looked out the window, nodded, and asked a question when the silence lasted too long. Inside my mind, however, the security footage played again and again. The woman's hand on his arm. The envelope. The way they had stood close together in a corridor customers were not supposed to enter. At home, we unpacked the groceries. Eric placed the coffee in the wrong cabinet, and I corrected him as I always did. We made lunch. He asked whether I wanted to watch a movie later. I said yes. The entire afternoon felt like a performance whose script I had memorized without realizing it. That evening, while Eric prepared dinner, I studied him from across the kitchen. He moved with the confidence of someone who believed he was completely understood. He tasted the sauce, added more salt, and asked me about a design proposal I had been working on. His interest appeared genuine. That was what disturbed me most. I had expected a guilty man to look nervous. I had expected him to avoid my eyes or speak too quickly. Instead, Eric behaved exactly like the husband I had trusted for 19 years. After dinner, we washed the dishes together. He dried while I put everything away. We watched the evening news. Around 10, we went upstairs. I lay beside him in bed with a book open in front of me, though I read the same paragraph several times without understanding it. Eric checked his messages, placed the phone on the nightstand, and turned off the lamp. For a moment, I believed I had imagined the change in him. Then, after he thought I had stopped paying attention, he reached for the phone again. He turned it face down. Instead of returning it to the nightstand, he slid it beneath his pillow. It was a small movement, almost nothing. Yet in 19 years of marriage, I had never seen him do it before. I closed my book and switched off my light. Eric fell asleep quickly. His breathing became slow, and even the same familiar rhythm I had heard beside me for nearly 2 decades. I remained awake, staring into the darkness. I did not know whether he was having an affair. I did not know whether the woman was a lover, a client, a colleague, or something more dangerous. I did not know what had been inside the envelope or why they needed a hidden corridor to exchange it. But I knew one thing with absolute certainty. Eric had lied to me. He had not stepped outside to take a phone call. He had met a woman he already knew in a place designed to keep them out of sight. Frank had seen them together before, and now Eric was sleeping beside me with his phone hidden beneath his pillow. The footage was not the whole truth. It was only the first visible crack in something that had likely been forming for a long time. I could have awakened him. I could have demanded an explanation while the anger was still hot enough to give me courage, but I had known Eric too long. He was intelligent, persuasive, and skilled at making complicated situations sound reasonable. If I confronted him with one silent video and no context, he would give me an explanation. Whether it was true or not, I might want so badly to believe him that I would accept it. Worse, he would know I was watching, so I decided to do nothing. At least nothing he could see. The next morning, I left the house before Eric woke and drove to a small office supply store across town. I bought a plain black notebook, the kind students used for lectures. It had no pattern on the cover, no label, and nothing that would make it memorable. When I returned home, Eric was making coffee. "Where did you go?" he asked. "I needed a few things for work." He accepted the answer without question. Later, while he showered, I sat alone at my desk and opened the notebook to the first page. My hand hovered over the paper for several seconds. Then I wrote the date. Beneath it, I recorded the time we entered Riverside Market, the moment Eric claimed he needed to call the Whitmore account, the 15 minutes he disappeared, and every detail I could remember from the security footage. At the bottom of the page, I wrote one final sentence. Eric said he was outside on a work call. He was not. I closed the notebook and placed it inside the bottom drawer of my nightstand beneath a stack of old magazines. That was the first lie I documented. I did not yet know how many more would follow. For the first few days, the black notebook remained almost empty. I had expected the act of watching Eric to reveal something immediately. A careless message left open on his phone, a name spoken in his sleep, another unexplained disappearance that would confirm everything I feared. Instead, our life continued with such convincing normality that I sometimes wondered whether the scene at Riverside Market had been less significant than it appeared. Eric woke at the same time every morning. He made coffee, read the financial pages on his tablet, and complained about traffic before leaving for work. He sent me messages during the day asking whether we needed milk, or reminding me that the plumber was coming on Friday. At dinner, he spoke about clients, interest rates, and the endless administrative problems of running a consulting practice. Nothing in his manner suggested that he believed his marriage was in danger. That made my silence easier to maintain and harder to endure. Each night after Eric fell asleep, I opened the bottom drawer of my nightstand and took out the notebook. At first, I felt foolish, staring at the mostly blank pages. I was not a detective. I was a woman in her late 40s, sitting in bed beside a sleeping husband, writing down details that might mean nothing. Monday, 7:15 p.m. Eric arrived home 20 minutes later than usual. Tuesday, 8:40 p.m. He received a call and stepped onto the back porch. Wednesday, 6:25 a.m. He changed the passcode on his phone. The entries looked small and almost embarrassing when written in ink. A late arrival could be traffic. A private call could involve confidential information. A changed passcode might be exactly what he claimed it was, a new security requirement from one of the financial institutions he worked with. For 19 years, I had interpreted uncertainty in Eric's favor. Trust had taught me to search for harmless explanations before suspicious ones. Even after seeing him in that hidden corridor, the habit remained. I hated myself a little for recording his movements. Every time I wrote in the notebook, I felt as though I were crossing a line inside our marriage. I had never monitored him before. I had never checked his messages, searched his pockets, or questioned every delay. We had built our relationship on the belief that neither of us needed to prove where we had been. Now I was documenting the hour he entered the house and the direction he faced when taking a call. Part of me wondered whether suspicion could become its own form of betrayal. Perhaps I was destroying something simply by examining it too closely. Then I remembered the security footage. I remembered the woman's hand on Eric's arm, the folded document disappearing beneath his jacket, and the ease with which he had stood beside our car afterward and described a conversation that had never taken place. Closing my eyes to those facts would not restore our marriage. It would only make me easier to deceive. Years earlier, during an argument about money, Eric had given me advice he repeated so often that it became one of his personal rules. "Don't react emotionally," he had said. "Look at the numbers. Look at the pattern. One event can mislead you. A pattern usually doesn't." At the time, he had been explaining why a single bad month did not mean my design business was failing. Now his words returned with an irony sharp enough to make me almost laugh. So I followed his method. I stopped trying to interpret each incident by itself. Instead, I collected them. I recorded when he left, when he returned, which client he named, and how much detail he offered. I wrote down the calls he took outside, and the evenings he claimed a meeting had run late. I noted the restaurants I could smell on his clothes: garlic, grilled meat, a smoky perfume of expensive coffee, especially when he insisted he had spent the afternoon in an office. I did not ask many questions. Questions created answers, and answers warned people about what you had noticed. Instead, I listened. On one Thursday, Eric arrived home shortly after 9. He had sent a message around 6 saying a meeting with Sanderson was running late. "Difficult client?" I asked while reheating the pasta I had saved for him. "The worst kind," he said, removing his jacket. "He wants the returns of a high-risk portfolio without accepting any risk." I smiled faintly. "Is that possible?" "Only in his imagination." He kissed my forehead and walked upstairs to change. When I lifted his jacket from the back of the chair, intending to hang it in the hall closet, I smelled roasted garlic and red wine. There was also a small paper receipt folded in one pocket. I did not remove it, but the corner revealed the name of a restaurant across town, one Sanderson had never been connected to in any of Eric's previous stories. I wrote the restaurant's name in the notebook. The following morning I searched for it online. It was an expensive Italian place with private booths and a business lunch menu that ended at 3 in the afternoon. Eric had claimed his meeting lasted until after 8. The discrepancy was not proof of anything, but it joined the others. A few days later, he took a call while we were cleaning the kitchen. The screen lit up on the counter, displaying only a number. Eric crossed the room so quickly that he nearly knocked over a glass. "I need to take this," he said. "Who is it?" "Ashford Group." The answer came too fast. He stepped onto the porch and pulled the door closed behind him. I continued wiping the counter, pretending not to watch through the window. He stood with his back to the kitchen, one hand pressed against his hip. His voice was too low for me to hear, but his posture was tense. At one point, he turned toward the glass and saw me. His expression changed immediately. The tension disappeared, replaced by a casual smile. He raised one finger, signaling that he would be another minute. I smiled back. When he returned, I asked nothing. That night, Ashford Group became another line in the notebook. The names accumulated slowly: Whitmore, Sanderson, Ashford Group. They sounded legitimate enough, but the more often Eric used them, the less substance they seemed to possess. He never provided a first name for Whitmore. Sanderson appeared in several unrelated stories, each involving a different type of financial problem. Ashford Group had no clear industry location or purpose. When I casually asked whether Ashford was expanding, Eric paused for half a second before answering. "They're restructuring." "What kind of company are they?" "Private holdings." "That sounds vague." "It is vague. That's part of the problem." He smiled and changed the subject. I wrote down the exchange word for word. After 10 days, a rhythm began to emerge. Thursdays were the clearest. Almost every Thursday, Eric stayed out later than usual. The explanation varied, but the timing did not. Sometimes it was a client dinner. Sometimes a portfolio review. Once he claimed he needed to help an elderly couple reorganize their estate documents before they left the country. The second Tuesdays were different, but equally consistent. Every other Tuesday, he left the office early or announced a late afternoon meeting that extended into the evening. These appointments were often connected to Ashford Group, though twice he used the Whitmore name instead. At first, I thought I might be forcing unrelated details into a pattern because I wanted certainty. I drew a small calendar in the notebook and marked each absence. Then I compared it with the entries from the previous 2 weeks. Thursday, second Tuesday, Thursday, second Tuesday. The regularity was unmistakable. These were not emergencies, they were appointments. Eric's lies had structure. That realization frightened me more than the thought of a simple affair. An impulsive relationship could produce chaotic behavior, unexpected absences, emotional mistakes, careless messages. What I saw instead was scheduled, controlled, and practiced. Whoever the woman was, she and Eric had established a system that allowed them to meet without disturbing the surface of his life. He did not disappear randomly. He disappeared according to a calendar. I began to understand why he had seemed so calm. He was not improvising. He had repeated the routine enough times that deception had become another professional skill. The following Thursday, Eric told me over breakfast that he would be home late. "Sanderson again?" I asked. He glanced up from his coffee. "No? Ashford." I nodded as though the name meant something. "What time should I expect you?" "Probably 9. Don't wait for dinner." He leaned over, kissed my forehead, and carried his cup to the sink. That gesture, once reassuring, now felt like punctuation at the end of a lie. All day I considered following him. The idea made my stomach tighten. Recording information from inside my own home was one thing. Driving after my husband through the city was something else. It felt intrusive, humiliating, and frighteningly close to admitting that our marriage had already become a contest between concealment and discovery. I did not go. Instead, I stayed home, worked on a client proposal, and checked the clock every 20 minutes. Eric returned at 9:12. He smelled faintly of coffee and rain. I wrote down the time. The next Tuesday, the pattern repeated. That was when I made my decision. At dinner the night before, I mentioned that I might meet a potential client on Tuesday evening. Eric looked pleased. "That's good," he said. "What kind of project?" "A renovated townhouse. They're considering a full interior redesign." The lie formed more easily than I expected. I had not prepared the details in advance, yet the words arrived smoothly. Perhaps living beside deception had taught me something without my consent. Perhaps everyone was capable of lying when the truth felt too dangerous. What part of town, he asked. North Side. Niche area. They're still interviewing designers, so nothing is certain. You'll get it. His confidence in me made the guilt worse. For 19 years, I had never invented a meeting to hide my movements from him. I had occasionally softened the truth about how much I had spent on fabric samples, or pretended not to know where his favorite sweater had gone after I donated it, but I had never created an entire evening that did not exist. As I sat across from him describing fictional clients, I felt as though I had stepped into the same moral darkness I blamed him for creating. Then I reminded myself that my lie had a different purpose. Eric lied to preserve control over me. I was lying to discover what he had already chosen to hide. The distinction did not make me proud, but it allowed me to continue. On Tuesday afternoon, I changed clothes twice before settling on dark trousers, a plain coat and shoes I could walk in quietly. I told myself that the clothing did not matter yet. Every choice made the situation feel more deliberate. Before leaving, I checked the address Eric had mentioned weeks earlier while discussing Ashford Group. It belonged to a small business plaza off Route 9. The complex contained several offices, a dry cleaner, a pharmacy, and a coffee shop called Bellamy's. I arrived 40 minutes early. The parking lot was busier than I expected, which both comforted and alarmed me. It meant I could remain unnoticed, but it also meant I would have to choose a position carefully. I parked across the street beneath the faded awning of the dry cleaner. From there, I could see the main entrance to Bellamy's through the gap between two delivery vans. Rain had begun to fall light enough to blur the windshield without becoming a storm. I turned off the engine and sat with both hands resting on the steering wheel. For several minutes, I considered leaving. I had already seen enough to know Eric was lying. Following him might only provide an image I would spend the rest of my life trying to erase. If the woman entered the cafe and kissed him, the uncertainty would end, but so would something inside me that had not yet completely accepted what was happening. There was still a fragile shelter in not knowing the whole truth. I could drive home. I could tell Eric the client canceled. I could place the notebook back beneath the magazines and wait until I felt stronger. My hand moved toward the ignition. Then I saw Eric's car. He entered the plaza from the south entrance and drove slowly through the parking lot. He was wearing his charcoal suit, the one he reserved for important meetings. Even from across the road, I recognized the way he checked his reflection in the rearview mirror before getting out. He carried no briefcase. That detail caught my attention immediately. Eric rarely attended formal client meetings without one. His laptop contracts and financial documents traveled with him everywhere. He locked the car and walked toward Bellamy's. I sank lower in my seat. He did not look around nervously. He did not behave like someone afraid of being seen. He entered the coffee shop with the relaxed posture of a man following a familiar routine. I checked the time and wrote it on a loose piece of paper resting on my lap. 4:38 p.m. Eric arrived alone. For the next 20 minutes, I watched the entrance. Customers came and went. A woman with a stroller struggled to open an umbrella. Two teenage boys ran through the rain carrying paper cups. A delivery driver entered through a side door and emerged minutes later with an empty cart. At 4:59, a silver sedan turned into the plaza. It did not park near Bellamy's. Instead, it continued through the lot and disappeared behind the pharmacy. A few minutes later, a woman appeared on the sidewalk from the direction of the rear parking area. I recognized her immediately. The dark blonde hair, the fitted blazer, the same upright, purposeful walk I had seen on the security recording. She carried a leather folder beneath one arm and a phone in the opposite hand. She paused outside. Bellamy's glanced at the screen and entered without looking toward Eric's car. My heart began beating so forcefully that I could hear it. For a moment, I remained frozen behind the wheel. Seeing her on a silent monitor had been painful but distant. Watching her move through the real world made the situation undeniable. She was no longer a grainy figure in black and white. She was a living person with a schedule, a car, and a destination that included my husband. I waited another minute before leaving my vehicle. The rain had grown steadier. I opened an umbrella and crossed the street, keeping my face angled downward. There was a small covered walkway opposite the cafe, partially hidden by decorative trees and a row of newspaper boxes. From there, I could see through Bellamy's front windows without standing directly outside. The coffee shop was designed to look expensive without seeming formal. Exposed brick walls, low amber lights, dark wooden tables, and framed photographs of European streets created an atmosphere of privacy. Most of the seating was arranged in small booths along the walls. Eric sat near the back. The woman sat across from him. There was no kiss. No embrace. No smile of secret lovers finally reunited. Instead, they looked serious. Eric had placed a sheet of paper between them. He pointed to several lines while the woman followed his hand with her eyes. She opened the leather folder and removed a second document. They spoke quietly occasionally, leaning closer, but their body language was focused rather than affectionate. I watched for several minutes, confused by my own reaction. I had prepared myself to see romance. I expected a touch across the table, a private laugh, or some intimate gesture that would explain the secrecy in a familiar way. The absence of those things should have relieved me. It did not. What I saw felt colder and more deliberate. The woman took out a pen and wrote something in the margin of the document. Eric shook his head, reached across the table, and tapped another section. She listened, then removed several pages from the folder and handed them to him. He studied them with the same concentration he used when reviewing our taxes. At one point, she looked toward the window. I stepped behind one of the trees, my breath trapped in my chest. When I looked again, she had returned her attention to Eric. Their coffee remained almost untouched. They were not there to spend time together. They were there to complete something. That thought brought me back to the supermarket corridor. The envelope beneath Eric's jacket. The separate entrances. The side door that did not always latch. The same choreography was happening again. Two people meeting in a public place while taking careful steps not to appear connected. The woman arrived 20 minutes after Eric. She had parked behind another business. They sat in a booth away from the main entrance. Documents passed between them. Nothing about it felt spontaneous. I stayed beneath the covered walkway for nearly 40 minutes. During that time, Eric spoke more than the woman did. He seemed to be explaining a sequence, occasionally drawing lines on a page or using his phone calculator. She asked questions, folded her arms, and once pressed two fingers against her temple as though considering a difficult decision. There was familiarity between them, but not tenderness. I could not decide whether that made the truth better or worse. If she were simply his lover, then at least the betrayal would have a recognizable shape. It would be painful, selfish, and human. People became lonely. They made terrible choices. They confused desire with escape. This looked like work. And yet no legitimate business relationship needed hidden hallways, separate arrivals, or invented client names. The woman eventually gathered the papers and placed most of them back in her folder. She left one thin packet beside Eric. Then she stood. Eric did not rise with her. He remained seated, looking down at the packet. She said something before leaving. He answered without smiling. There was no goodbye kiss. She walked out of Bellamy's at 558. I remained hidden as she crossed the plaza, passed the pharmacy, and disappeared around the corner. A moment later, the silver sedan emerged from the rear lot and turned onto Route 9. Eric stayed inside for another 11 minutes. When he finally came out, he carried the packet beneath his coat. He checked his phone, adjusted his tie, and walked toward his car. He did not look around. At 6:15, he drove away. I returned to my car and locked the doors. For a long time, I sat without starting the engine. The evidence before me was both clearer and more confusing than before. Eric was unquestionably meeting the woman in secret. He was unquestionably lying about where he went and whom he saw. But whatever connected them appeared to involve documents, calculations, and a level of organization that went beyond an affair. I opened the black notebook which I had placed in my handbag and wrote down everything while the details were fresh. Eric arrived at 438. Woman arrived at 459. Silver sedan parked behind pharmacy. Documents exchanged. No obvious affection. She left first at 558. Eric left at 609. Separate departures. The phrase "no obvious affection" bothered me. I underlined it once. Then I added a question beneath the entry. If this is not only an affair, what are they planning? I drove home by a longer route to make sure I arrived after Eric. When I entered the house, he was in the kitchen opening a bottle of wine. "How did the meeting go?" he asked. The ease of the question almost made me lose control. I placed my handbag on the counter and removed my coat. "Promising," I said. "They're interviewing 2 other designers. You'll be better than both of them. How was Ashford?" He turned toward the cabinet for 2 glasses. "Complicated. We're restructuring several investments." The word restructuring lodged in my mind. "Did you make progress?" "I think so. He handed me a glass. For a moment, we stood facing each other across the kitchen island, each of us holding a private version of the evening. I wondered whether he could see the rain on my shoes or the tension in my hands. I wondered whether lying changed a person's face in ways only the liar noticed. If Eric suspected anything, he gave no sign. He raised his glass. To your new client. I touched mine to his. To progress, I said. Over the following 2 weeks, Eric's behavior changed in ways so slight that another person might not have noticed. His phone, once left casually on counters and coffee tables, remained with him at all times. He carried it into the bathroom. He took it outside when walking the dog. If he went upstairs to change, the device went into his pocket even when the battery was charging. One morning, I saw him enter a new passcode. 3 days later, it changed again. When I mentioned it lightly, he did not look up from the screen. Security protocols. For your phone, some of the accounts I access require stronger protection now. That seems inconvenient. It is. The answer was technically plausible, which was Eric's favorite kind of lie. It offered enough logic to discourage further questions. He also began taking evening walks alone. This was unusual. We had often walked together after dinner, especially in spring, but Eric now claimed he needed movement after sitting all day. I'll only be 20 minutes, he would say, already reaching for his jacket. Every time he took his phone. Once I waited several minutes and stepped outside to bring a package in from the front porch. Eric stood near the end of the block with the phone pressed to his ear. His voice was low, but I heard one sentence clearly. No, not from that account. He turned and saw me. The call ended almost immediately. Everything okay? I asked when he returned. Fine. Who were you talking to? A client. Which one? The pause was brief but present. Whitmore. I nodded. That night, I wrote down the exact sentence I had overheard. No, not from that account. The words suggested money. I tried not to build conclusions from a single fragment, but it was impossible not to connect it with the papers at Bellamy's and the envelope from the supermarket. Eric's unusual tenderness increased at the same time. One Friday, he came home carrying flowers. Not roses, which he knew I found formal, but white tulips mixed with greenery. What are these for? I asked. Do I need a reason? You usually have one. He smiled. Then the reason is that I saw them and thought of you. He placed them in a vase himself. The gesture should have touched me. Instead, it unsettled me more than his late nights. For the rest of the evening, I studied the flowers while we ate dinner. I remembered other times he had surprised me after my mother's funeral when he filled the bedroom with yellow daffodils because she had loved them. After my first major design contract, when he sent an arrangement to my office with a card saying he had never doubted me. Those memories had once felt pure. Now suspicion reached backward and touched everything. Was this new bouquet evidence of guilt? Was he trying to reassure me because he sensed distance? Or did he still love me in some genuine, complicated way while secretly building another part of his life? I wanted to believe that affection and deception could not occupy the same person. The truth seemed to be that they could. That possibility hurt more than simple hatred would have. A cruel stranger would have been easier to leave. Eric was still the man who remembered how I took my coffee, checked the pressure in my tires, and placed a blanket over me when I fell asleep on the sofa. He could be thoughtful in the morning and lie to me before dinner. The contradiction became exhausting. I continued recording details. Thursday, 8:51 p.m. Home late, said Sanderson meeting. Saturday, 10:20 a.m. Took phone into shower area. Sunday, 7:34 p.m. Walked alone. Call ended when I approached. Tuesday, 5:10 p.m. Claimed Ashford meeting. No briefcase. The notebook filled quickly now. I began storing digital photographs of certain pages in a password-protected folder, afraid Eric might discover the original. I also photographed receipts when I could do so without removing them permanently. I did not want him to notice anything missing. The process changed me. I became quieter but more attentive. I stopped hearing Eric's stories as complete narratives and began listening for the structures beneath them. Names, times, locations, repetitions. I noticed when he gave too much detail and when he gave almost none. I learned that he often touched the side of his neck before answering an unexpected question. I learned that he used humor when he needed to redirect a conversation. These habits had probably existed for years. I simply had never needed to see them. Then, on a rainy Sunday afternoon, the investigation moved from suspicion to something tangible. Eric left around noon for the gym. He told me he might stop by the office afterward to collect a file. I had planned to spend the afternoon organizing our tax documents. It was a task I completed every year, usually with Eric nearby to answer questions. Our dining table became covered with folders, statements, receipts, and old records going back 6 years. I worked slowly sorting documents into categories: mortgage, insurance, retirement, business expenses, investments. The rain tapped steadily against the windows, and for almost an hour I became absorbed enough to forget the notebook hidden upstairs. Then I opened a folder labeled Investments 2021. Most of the contents were familiar brokerage statements, dividend summaries, and documents connected to a retirement account Eric had explained at the time. Near the back, beneath several pages stapled together, I found a single sheet of paper folded in half. It did not match the others. There was no company logo at the top, only a bank name printed in small letters, followed by a routing number and a partial account number. I stared at it. The bank was unfamiliar. Eric had never mentioned it. I unfolded the page completely and examined the details. The account was not listed under both our names. In fact, the document did not display a full account holder's name at all. It appeared to be a transfer confirmation or account verification sheet rather than a standard statement. A handwritten note in Eric's writing appeared near the bottom. Primary receiving account. Do not use joint profile. My entire body went cold. I read the sentence again, then a third time. The phrase was not ambiguous. It did not refer to a password or administrative preference. It specifically distinguished the account from our joint financial profile. I looked through the rest of the folder for related documents. Nothing. I checked the 2020 and 2022 investment files. No mention of the bank. I opened the cabinet where we stored current statements and searched every envelope. The account did not appear anywhere else. For 19 years, I had believed I knew the structure of our finances. Eric handled most of the technical details because it was his profession, but we filed taxes jointly. We discussed retirement plans, mortgage payments, investments, and major expenses. At least once a year, he sat with me at the kitchen table and walked through what he called our financial picture. This account had never been part of that picture. I took out my phone and photographed the page from several angles. Then I wrote down the routing number and every visible digit of the account. My hands shook badly enough that I had to write twice. The rain continued falling outside, but the house seemed unnaturally quiet. I listened for the garage door even though Eric had been gone for less than 2 hours. I wanted to call him immediately. I wanted to demand the full statement and ask why a receiving account existed outside our joint profile. I imagined his possible explanations. A business reserve, a client account, an old investment vehicle, a temporary account he had forgotten to mention. He would produce words, and because finance was his world rather than mine, he might make any explanation sound reasonable. The document itself might disappear afterward. Other records could be moved. The woman from Bellamy's could be warned. I forced myself to breathe slowly. Look at the numbers. Look at the pattern. Eric's own rules stopped me from reacting. I returned the original page to precisely where I had found it. I aligned the papers, closed the folder, and placed it back in the stack. Then I sat at the dining table and wrote everything in the notebook. Unknown bank. Unknown receiving account. Instruction not to use joint profile. Document hidden inside 2021 investment folder. The discovery changed the meaning of every earlier clue. The meetings might involve money. The documents might be transfer records. The sentence I had overheard, "No, not from that account," might not have been an isolated fragment. I no longer believed the woman's role was limited to an affair if an affair existed at all. Something financial was happening beyond my view. The frightening part was not simply that Eric had an account I did not know about. Married couples sometimes maintained separate accounts for legitimate reasons. The frightening part was the way it had been hidden, the handwritten instruction, and its connection to a pattern of secret meetings and invented clients. I needed someone who understood the difference between unusual and dangerous. Someone Eric could not confuse with technical language. Years earlier, a colleague named Melissa had gone through a bitter custody dispute. She had once told me that her lawyer, Rebecca Lawson, was the only person who had managed to keep her calm when every conversation with her former husband became manipulative. "Rebecca doesn't comfort you," Melissa had said. "She gives you facts. Sometimes facts are better." I had met Rebecca briefly at a charity event. I remembered a sharp-eyed woman with a direct voice and an expression that suggested she disliked wasted time. I searched for her office online. Her practice handled divorce-complex marital assets, business ownership disputes, and financial disclosure. My finger hovered over the number. Making the call felt larger than following Eric. Following him could still be described as gathering information. Calling a divorce attorney even for advice meant acknowledging that our marriage might be in genuine danger. I looked at the tax folders spread across the table. 19 years of shared documents. 19 years of believing every important number belonged to both of us. Then I looked at the photograph of the hidden account on my phone. I pressed call. A receptionist answered after 2 rings. Lawson Family Legal. For a moment I could not speak. "Hello," she said. "Yes. I'd like to schedule a consultation with Rebecca Lawson. May I ask what the matter concerns?" My eyes moved toward the front window. Eric's car was not yet in the driveway. I lowered my voice anyway. "I think my husband is hiding something." The receptionist paused only long enough to begin typing. "Do you believe it involves marital assets?" "I don't know," I said. "I found an account I've never seen before. There have also been meetings he has lied about." "Do you have copies of the documents?" "Yes." "And does your husband know you found them?" "No." "Keep it that way for now." The firmness of her answer startled me. She offered me an appointment 2 days later. Before ending the call, she asked whether there was anything else Rebecca should know in advance. I looked down at the black notebook, its pages filled with dates, restaurant names, invented clients, and fragments of conversations. "I think my husband is hiding something," I repeated this time more steadily. "But I don't know how large it is yet." After the call ended, I remained at the table for several minutes. I did not feel relieved. Relief would come only if the account had an innocent explanation, and I no longer trusted innocence simply because I wanted it to exist. What I felt instead was a strange shift in balance. Until that moment, Eric had possessed all the information. He knew where he went, whom he met, what the hidden account contained, and why documents were being exchanged in secret. I knew only what he allowed me to see. Calling Rebecca did not give me the truth. But it was the first decision I had made that Eric had not anticipated. I closed the notebook and returned it to my handbag rather than the nightstand. The house no longer felt like a safe place to store it. 20 minutes later, the garage door opened. Eric entered carrying a gym bag and a paper cup of coffee. "You're still working on taxes?" he asked when he saw the folders. "Almost finished." He placed the coffee beside me. "I brought you one." I looked at the cup. He had remembered the exact order: medium roast, a little cream, no sugar. "Thank you." He leaned down and kissed the top of my head. For one brief second, I almost told him everything. The hidden account, the plaza, the woman, the lawyer's appointment. Then he straightened and walked toward the stairs, humming quietly to himself. I wrapped both hands around the coffee cup and listened until his footsteps disappeared above me. 2 days later, I would carry the black notebook into Rebecca Lawson's office. I would place the photographs, the account number, and the timeline on her desk. And for the first time, someone other than me would begin examining the life Eric had built behind my back. Rebecca Lawson's office occupied the 7th floor of a narrow building overlooking the river. The reception area was quiet, almost severe, with pale walls, dark furniture, and no family photographs or decorative objects that might encourage small talk. Everything about the space seemed designed to remove emotion from difficult decisions. I arrived 20 minutes early. The black notebook sat inside my handbag beside printed photographs of Eric entering Bellamy's, a copy of the strange account page, and a timeline I had typed the night before. I had arranged the information chronologically the way Eric organized financial reports. Dates in one column, explanations in another, contradictions highlighted in yellow. Preparing the documents had made the situation feel less like a nightmare and more like a case. That frightened me. A receptionist offered me coffee, but I declined. My stomach had been tight since sunrise, and I was afraid that if I accepted anything, my hands would shake badly enough to spill it. At exactly 10, a door opened and Rebecca appeared. I recognized her immediately from the charity event years earlier. She was in her early 50s with dark hair cut just above her shoulders, and an expression that was not unkind but offered no false reassurance. She wore a navy suit and carried a legal pad beneath one arm. "Stephanie Adams." I stood. "Come in." Her office was brighter than the reception area. A wall of windows overlooked the river, and shelves behind her desk held rows of legal books interrupted by several framed certificates. She gestured toward a chair and waited until I sat before taking her place across from me. "Tell me what happened," she said. There was no introductory conversation, no gentle invitation to describe how I felt. I appreciated that more than I expected. I placed the black notebook on her desk. "My husband and I have been married for 19 years. Rebecca opened the legal pad. "His name: Eric Adams. Occupation: financial consultant. He owns a small practice." She wrote it down. "Children: no. Joint property: our house." retirement accounts, investments. His business was started during the marriage. I also have a small interior design business. Any previous separation discussions? Never. Any history of infidelity that you know of? No. The phrase "that you know of" felt like a blade slipped carefully between two ribs. I told her about Riverside Market Frank, the security footage, and the woman in the corridor. I described the folded document, the touch on Eric's arm, and his lie about the Whitmore call. Then I showed her the entries in the notebook, the repeated Thursdays, the alternating Tuesdays, the client names that shifted without explanation. Rebecca listened without interrupting. When I reached the meeting at Bellamy's, I placed the photographs on her desk. None of them showed anything romantic. Eric entered the cafe alone. The woman arrived later. One photograph showed them seated across from each other with documents spread between them. Rebecca examined each image carefully. "You took these yourself?" "Yes." "Did you enter the cafe?" "No." "Did your husband see you?" "I don't think so." "You're certain?" "As certain as I can be." She placed the photographs beside the notebook. "What makes you believe the woman is more than a business contact?" "The secrecy." "They meet separately." She parked behind another building. At the supermarket, they used a restricted corridor. "Eric lies every time he sees her." "That does not necessarily mean they are having an affair." "I know." "Do you believe they are?" "I don't know anymore." That answer was the first completely honest thing I had said aloud about Natalie. Part of me still believed there had to be a romantic relationship. The familiarity between them suggested intimacy. Yet every meeting I had witnessed centered on papers, numbers, and planned movements. If affection existed, it was wrapped around something else. I removed the final document from my handbag. "This is why I called." Rebecca studied the photograph of the account verification page. Her eyes moved to Eric's handwritten note. "Primary receiving account. Do not use joint profile." Her expression changed almost imperceptibly. "Where did you find the original?" "In an old investment folder from 2021. "Does he know you found it?" "No." "Did you remove it?" "No. I photographed it and put it back." "Good." The single word carried more weight than praise. Rebecca looked through my typed timeline. "Do you have access to your joint bank statements?" "Yes." "His business statements?" "Some of them." "Eric handles most of the business accounting." "Tax returns?" 6 years. Possibly more. "Retirement documents?" "Yes." "Property records?" "The house deed and mortgage documents are at home." She set down her pen. "Stephanie, I'm going to tell you what I know and what I do not know. I do not know whether your husband is having an affair. The photographs do not prove one, and from a legal perspective, that is not where I would focus first." I looked at her. "What should I focus on?" "The money." She tapped the account page. "A private account is not automatically illegal. Married people may maintain separate accounts for legitimate reasons. A business owner may also have financial relationships a spouse does not understand in detail. But the note about avoiding the joint profile, combined with unexplained meetings and repeated false statements, raises a more serious question, which is whether he is moving marital assets into places you cannot see. The words settled heavily between us. I had considered hidden money, but hearing a lawyer describe it as a possible strategy transformed the fear into something concrete. Why would he do that? There are several possibilities. He may be protecting money from creditors. He may be funding an undisclosed business. He may be hiding income for tax purposes. Or he may be positioning assets in advance of a separation. A divorce. Possibly. I looked toward the river. Boats moved slowly beneath the window. Cars crossed the bridge. From 7 floors above, everything appeared orderly and distant. "We have never discussed divorce." "That does not mean he has not." The answer was not cruel. It was factual. Rebecca leaned forward. "I need you to understand something before you confront him. If Eric is merely lying about a personal relationship, confronting him may produce denial, confession, or some combination of both. Painful, but manageable. If he is actively transferring assets, confrontation could warn him to accelerate the process. He could move more money. He could move it, destroy records, create new entities, close accounts, or begin constructing an explanation that is difficult to challenge later. What am I supposed to do? Continue living with him as though nothing is happening? For now, yes. I felt a flash of anger. You're asking me to smile at a man who may be planning to leave me with nothing. I'm asking you to avoid giving him information before we know what he has done. Her voice remained calm. Confrontation without information is how people lose everything. The sentence silenced me. Rebecca allowed a moment to pass before continuing. You have already done the most difficult part correctly. You observed without alerting him. You preserved the original document. You created a timeline. Now, we need someone who can trace the numbers. She reached for the phone on her desk. I work with a forensic accountant named David Chen. He specializes in hidden income cases, business valuation, and asset tracing. He is patient, discreet, and very difficult to mislead. Will Eric know? Not unless you tell him. What would David need? Everything you can legally access. Tax filings, joint statements, investment reports, retirement accounts, mortgage records, business documents stored in your home, and any correspondence related to unfamiliar companies or transfers. I don't understand most of Eric's business records. You don't need to. David does. Rebecca called him while I sat there. She gave no dramatic description of my situation. She simply said she had a new matter involving possible undisclosed marital assets and asked whether he could meet us that week. When she ended the call, she handed me a list. Do not take originals if their absence might be noticed. Scan or photograph them. Preserve the folder structure where possible. Dates and context matter. What if I find something else? Document it and contact me. What if Eric asks why I'm looking through our records? Tax preparation, insurance review, estate planning. Choose something ordinary and do not over-explain. The advice sounded unsettlingly similar to the methods Eric had used against me. Before I left, Rebecca looked directly at me. One more thing. Do not attempt to access password-protected accounts you are not authorized to enter. Do not install software on his phone or computer. We protect you by keeping everything lawful. I understand. And Stephanie, yes, do not let the absence of obvious proof convince you that nothing is happening. Financial concealment is designed to look ordinary until the full pattern is visible. I carried those words home. For the next 3 days, I gathered documents. I waited until Eric left for work, then photographed tax returns, bank statements, loan agreements, retirement summaries, business invoices, property tax records, insurance policies, and brokerage reports. Some materials were stored in the dining room cabinet. Others were in labeled boxes in the basement or digital folders on our shared computer. I touched nothing that required Eric's password. The process was slow because I had to leave everything exactly as I found it. A document placed in the wrong folder might be enough to alert him. I photographed entire stacks before moving them, so I could reconstruct the original order. At night, Eric sat across from me at dinner and discussed ordinary things. A client had postponed a meeting. The neighbor's tree needed trimming. We should replace the upstairs carpet before winter. I listened and wondered how much of our shared life he considered real. David Chen joined Rebecca and me the following Friday. He was a soft-spoken man in his mid-50s with wire-framed glasses and a gray suit that seemed intentionally unremarkable. He carried a laptop and 2 empty folders. When we were introduced, he shook my hand once and took the chair beside Rebecca. I've reviewed the preliminary materials, he said. I have some questions before I begin. His manner was careful rather than cold. He did not look at me with pity, and he did not appear excited by the possibility of discovering wrongdoing. To him, the situation was a set of records that might or might not reveal a pattern. That neutrality calmed me. He asked how Eric's consulting business was structured, who prepared the taxes, and whether I had ever signed business loan documents. He wanted to know which accounts were joint, which were individual, and whether Eric received income through partnerships or referral agreements. Most of my answers were incomplete. I don't know. I'm not sure. Eric handled that. Each admission made me feel smaller. For years, I had believed trusting my husband with financial management was practical. He understood investments, tax strategy, and business structures. I understood spacelight materials and how to make a room feel like someone belonged there. We had divided responsibilities according to our strengths. Now that arrangement looked dangerously close to dependence. David never criticized me. He simply wrote down every answer and asked for the next document. We'll begin with the tax returns, he said. Then, reconcile the income reported there against known deposits, business activity, and investment changes. Hidden assets often leave indirect traces even when the primary account is concealed. What kind of traces? An unexplained drop in business cash. Payments to a vendor with no clear service. Loan repayments without a visible loan. Property expenses connected to an address the spouse does not recognize. He adjusted his glasses. Money is difficult to erase completely. It usually has to move through something. For the next 2 weeks, David worked quietly. At first, he found nothing. Our joint checking account was exactly what I expected. Mortgage payments arrived on schedule. Utilities, insurance, household expenses, and credit card balances matched our normal life. The retirement accounts appeared healthy. Our brokerage statements showed nothing alarming. Eric's business records also looked organized. Revenue came in from consulting clients. Expenses flowed out for software office, rent, professional insurance, subcontractors, and taxes. The numbers varied from month to month but remained plausible. The absence of evidence began to erode my confidence. Perhaps the strange account was connected to a legitimate business arrangement. Perhaps the woman was a consultant whose work required privacy. Perhaps Eric had lied because he feared I would misunderstand a complicated transaction. I knew these explanations did not account for everything, yet I wanted them to. One evening, Eric found me standing in the kitchen with the black notebook hidden beneath a stack of mail. "You look tired," he said. "Long day. Too many client revisions." "Yes." He came behind me and placed his hands on my shoulders. "You work too hard." For a moment, I closed my eyes. His touch was familiar. The warmth of his palms, the pressure of his thumbs near my neck, the faint scent of his soap, all of it belonged to the life I was trying to determine whether I still possessed. "What would you say," I asked carefully, "if I decided to slow down?" "Your business." "Everything." He turned me around. "I'd say you've earned it." There was no hesitation in his face, no visible cruelty. He looked like a man genuinely concerned about his wife. That night, I almost called Rebecca and told her to stop the investigation. The thought of dismantling 19 years over incomplete suspicions felt unbearable. Frank might have interpreted the corridor incorrectly. The cafe meeting might have been legitimate. The private account might be tied to a business client. I did not make the call. The following afternoon, David contacted me. "I found something I want to review in person," he said. His voice remained even, but the request made my stomach tighten. We met at Rebecca's office the next morning. David had connected his laptop to a larger screen. A spreadsheet filled the display, hundreds of rows organized by date, source, recipient, and amount. "At first, the business accounts appeared normal," he began. "The issue is not a single large withdrawal. It is a series of small transfers." He enlarged several rows. $400, $650, $900, $525. Each amount seemed insignificant compared with the overall movement of Eric's consulting practice. "These were categorized as professional services expenses," David explained. "Sometimes consulting support, sometimes research, sometimes administrative fees. To whom? The recipient name varies slightly on older records, but the account number is consistent." He clicked another tab. "Meridian Consulting Group." I had never heard the name. "What do they do?" "That is one of the questions." David showed us transfers across a 6-month period. They appeared once or twice a month, rarely on the same day. The values were modest, though several reached into the low thousands. "They look random," I said. "They are meant to." David moved to another section. Once I expanded the review from 6 months to 5 years, the pattern became clearer. The spreadsheet now displayed hundreds of entries. Red marks appeared beside transactions connected to Meridian. I found payments in 58 of the past 60 months. My throat tightened. "How much?" David did not answer immediately. He returned to the first page and pointed to a total at the bottom. $342,860. The number seemed too large to understand. I looked at Rebecca, expecting her to react, but she remained focused on the screen. "Over 5 years?" she asked. "Yes. From one account, primarily Eric's business operating account, but some transfers originated from a secondary reserve account. Both appear to contain marital income generated during the marriage." I stared at the total. $342,860. I thought about the decisions Eric and I had made during those years. The kitchen renovation we had delayed because he said cash flow was tight. The vacations we postponed. The months I accepted smaller design jobs because we agreed to be conservative. There had been evenings when Eric sat at the kitchen table explaining that business income fluctuated and that we needed to protect our future. Meanwhile, hundreds of thousands of dollars had been leaving that future, one transfer at a time. "Could these be legitimate expenses?" I asked. "Possibly," David said. "A payment is not improper merely because a spouse does not recognize it. The question is whether Meridian provided services of equivalent value. Did they? I have not found evidence yet." David opened a folder containing corporate information. Meridian Consulting Group was formed 5 years ago. That timing closely matches the beginning of the transfer pattern. He displayed a basic company profile. The business claimed to offer strategic consulting, operational planning, and growth partnerships. Its website contained generic photographs of offices, handshakes, and people pointing at charts. The language sounded polished but said almost nothing specific. There were no named executives, no client case studies, no detailed service descriptions, no verifiable office address beyond a commercial mailbox. "The company has a website," I said. "It has a web page," David corrected gently. "That is not the same as an operating business." He showed us the listed contact address. It belonged to a building that rented virtual office space by the month. "Does Meridian have employees?" Rebecca asked. "None that I can verify. Tax filings. Limited information. The structure is privately held and much of the public record is routed through a registered agent." "What about clients other than Eric?" "I have found almost no evidence of meaningful outside revenue." My mind returned to Bellamy's. The leather folder, the papers. Eric pointing to numbers. Could Meridian be the woman's company? "We don't know yet," David said. "The public filing uses a registered agent rather than an individual owner." "I'm working through the formation records." Rebecca turned toward me. "This is why the account document mattered. The individual transfers were small enough to disappear inside business expenses. Over time, they became a substantial diversion of marital income. Why would he use amounts like $400 or $600? "Because they do not attract attention," David said. "A large transfer invites questions. Small ones resemble routine operating costs. When the dates and descriptions vary, they are difficult to notice without comparing years of records." He had transformed Eric's deception into a system I could finally see. The money had not vanished through one dramatic act. It had been removed patiently, almost politely, in amounts designed to look forgettable. That made the betrayal feel more deliberate than any affair. An affair might begin in a moment of weakness. This required spreadsheets, accounts, repeated decisions, and the confidence that I would never examine the details. "How far back can you trace it?" Rebecca asked. 5 years with certainty. "There may be earlier activity through another entity, but I have not confirmed that." 5 years. I calculated backward. 5 anniversaries. 5 Christmases. 5 summers spent discussing retirement. While Eric gave me birthday gifts, held my hand at family dinners, and talked about our future, he had transferred money to Meridian almost every month. "Is this enough to confront him?" I asked. Rebecca shook her head. "It is enough to continue." The answer frustrated me, but I understood. We knew money had moved. We did not yet know where it ended, who controlled Meridian, or what Eric intended to do with the funds. David requested additional documents connected to Eric's business expenses, including invoices and any vendor agreements I could legally access. I searched the shared files at home and found several Meridian invoices. They were remarkably vague. Strategic advisory services, operational consultation, business development planning. Each invoice listed a fee but no hourly breakdown, project description, deliverable, or named consultant. The amounts did not always match the transfers exactly. Some invoices grouped several payments together, while others appeared to have been created later than the dates they supposedly covered. David noticed immediately. "The formatting changes," he said at our next meeting. "What does that mean?" "Some invoices may have been generated retrospectively. The document dates and metadata do not align consistently. Can you prove they are false?" "Not yet, but legitimate consulting invoices typically identify the work performed. These are designed to justify a payment without describing anything that can be tested." Rebecca examined one of the pages. "They create a paper shield." "Exactly," David said. "Enough documentation to discourage a casual question, but not enough to establish actual value." The investigation continued. At home, Eric remained relaxed. If anything, he seemed lighter than before. One Tuesday evening, he cooked dinner without being asked. He opened a bottle of wine and played music from the early years of our marriage. While chopping vegetables, he told a story about our first apartment where the bathroom ceiling leaked every time the upstairs neighbors took a shower. "We thought buying this house would solve every problem," he said, smiling. "It solved the ceiling problem and created 50 others." We laughed. The sound disturbed me because it was real. I still enjoyed him in certain moments. The realization did not excuse what he was doing, but it complicated my anger. I could not divide 19 years cleanly into truth and falsehood. Some memories had been genuine. Some kindnesses had likely been sincere. A person could love parts of a life while secretly dismantling its foundation. That was becoming the hardest truth to accept. After dinner, Eric leaned back in his chair and looked around the kitchen. You know, I've been thinking about retirement. The statement seemed casual, but every part of me became alert. Retirement. Not tomorrow. You're 51. Exactly. Old enough to plan, young enough to enjoy it when the time comes. What kind of plan? He swirled the wine in his glass. Maybe sell the house in a few years. Move somewhere warmer. Arizona, perhaps. Or the Carolinas. You hate extreme heat. Arizona is a dry heat. That is what people say before they discover it is still heat. He laughed. I'm serious. Lower property taxes, smaller house, fewer responsibilities. I studied him. Would we need to sell this house? It's our largest asset. It would make sense. The answer arrived too smoothly. For years, Eric had resisted every suggestion that we downsize. He loved the neighborhood, the yard, and the office he had built upstairs. Now he described selling as though it were the natural next stage of our lives. What would we do with the proceeds, I asked. Invest most of it. Keep some liquid. We could travel. We. He looked surprised. Of course we. The word should have reassured me. Instead, I heard Rebecca's warning. A person planning an exit might first create a shared narrative. If I agreed that selling the house was our mutual dream, the transaction would not look suspicious. The largest visible asset in our marriage could be converted into cash, and cash could move. Eric reached across the table and covered my hand with his. Think about it. No winter. No property headaches. Just us. I smiled because he expected me to. That sounds peaceful. His thumb moved across my knuckles. It could be. Later, I recorded every word in the notebook. Selling the house was no longer an abstract retirement idea. It might be the final stage of a plan already underway. 2 days later, David called with the ownership record for Meridian. He asked that Rebecca and I meet him rather than discussing it over the phone. The caution in his voice told me the information mattered. When I arrived at Rebecca's office, a single document lay on the conference table. David waited until I sat before turning it toward me. The registered agent made the ownership difficult to identify, he said, but the original formation documents list a founding member. I looked down. The name meant nothing at first. Natalie Brooks. Then the photograph from the supermarket filled my mind. Dark blonde hair. Blazer. Hand on Eric's arm. Natalie, I said quietly. You know the name, Rebecca asked. No. But that has to be her. David had found a professional profile containing a photograph. He turned the laptop toward me. The woman from Bellamy's smiled from the screen. Her page described her as a strategic business consultant, specializing in growth partnerships, private market opportunities, and organizational development. Her background appeared polished. She had worked for several firms, advised small companies, and spoken at regional business events. Nothing on the profile suggested secrecy. She looks legitimate, I said. She may have legitimate experience, David replied. That does not establish whether Meridian performed the work Eric paid for. Rebecca read through the profile. Any relationship to his firm listed publicly. None. Other shared companies. I'm still searching. For the first time, the mysterious woman had a complete name. Natalie Brooks. I repeated it silently until it stopped feeling like a stranger's identity and became part of the architecture of my marriage. That night after Eric fell asleep, I searched for her. I knew Rebecca would have professionals conduct a more reliable review, but I needed to see the life Natalie presented to the world. Her online presence was controlled and professional. Photographs showed her at conferences, business lunches, and networking events. She wore variations of the same dark blazers and confident expression. Her posts discussed leadership, strategic growth, and the importance of building sustainable partnerships. The word partnership appeared repeatedly. I wondered what it meant to her. Was Eric a client? A lover. A collaborator. Had she helped design the transfer system, or had he used her company without fully explaining the source of the money? I wanted to hate her immediately, but hatred required certainty I did not yet possess. A woman could be complicit without understanding every consequence. She could also understand perfectly. Rebecca's paralegal searched public court records and found 2 civil lawsuits from nearly a decade earlier. The first had been filed by a former business partner who accused Natalie of violating a profit-sharing agreement and removing funds from a joint venture without proper authorization. The second came from an investor who claimed he had been given misleading information about the financial condition of a company Natalie helped manage. Neither case ended in a public verdict. Both were settled privately. Does that mean she committed fraud? I asked. No, Rebecca said. A settlement is not an admission. Business disputes are common and allegations are not proof. But it matters. It establishes context. David placed the filings beside the Meridian documents. Failed partnerships. Disputed funds. A consulting company with almost no visible operations. Significant payments from Eric. It is not enough to draw a final conclusion, but it is a pattern worth examining. Patterns. Everything returned to patterns. Natalie's past did not prove her role, but it suggested she understood complicated business structures and the movement of money between entities. She was not simply a woman Eric had met by accident. At home, I became more careful. Under Rebecca's guidance, I began building a complete inventory of our assets. The house deed confirmed that Eric and I held the property jointly. The mortgage balance was lower than I expected, which meant the equity was substantial. I photographed the deed current valuation, insurance records, renovation receipts, and proof that both our incomes had contributed to the home. I created lists of retirement accounts, brokerage holdings, vehicles, valuable furniture, and business equipment. I documented my design income and every major contribution I had made to household expenses. For the first time in 19 years, I assembled a financial picture that did not depend on Eric's summary. It was both empowering and humiliating. The information had always existed. I had simply trusted him to interpret it. Rebecca advised me to open a separate bank account in my name. The suggestion made me uncomfortable. Wouldn't that make me no different from him? No, she said. You are not diverting marital assets into a concealed company. You are establishing access to funds for ordinary living and legal expenses. How much should I move? Only your current design earnings for now. Keep records. Do not drain joint accounts. Do not create an appearance that you are retaliating. I opened the account with a modest deposit from a recent project. The amount was small compared with the money Eric had transferred, but the act felt enormous. For 19 years, every financial decision had been part of a shared system. Now I had created something outside his control. I did not feel triumphant. I felt sad. That account existed because I no longer believed my husband would protect me if our interests separated. I also began backing up documents in multiple locations. One encrypted drive remained with Rebecca. Another was stored in a safe deposit box. Digital copies went into a secure folder Eric could not access. Every precaution made the danger more real. Meanwhile, David continued tracing the Meridian funds. For several days, he found no clear destination beyond the company account. Then he discovered transfers moving out almost as quickly as they arrived. Meridian is not the end point, he explained during our next meeting. It is a pass-through. He drew a simple diagram on the conference room whiteboard. Eric's consulting business appeared on the left. An arrow led to Meridian. Two more arrows extended toward companies called Northline Strategy LLC and Harbor Ridge Partners. Both are connected to Natalie, David said. Not always through direct ownership. One uses a family trust. The other lists a business associate as manager. But the banking records and formation documents connect back to her. What happens after the money reaches those companies, I asked. It is divided. Some appears to cover ordinary expenses. Some is transferred again. A significant portion goes into real estate investments. He added 3 boxes to the diagram. Each represented a separate property holding company. They purchase real estate. Yes. With our money? With funds that can be traced back to Eric's business income. The route was not simple. Money moved from Eric's operating account into Meridian as consulting fees. Meridian sent portions to Northline and Harbor Ridge, where they appeared as business revenue or internal loans. Those companies then contributed capital to separate entities created to purchase property. By the time the money reached the final destination, Eric's name had disappeared from the paperwork. To an ordinary observer, the properties belonged to unrelated companies managed by Natalie or her associates. To David, the sequence formed a visible chain. Why use so many companies, I asked. Distance, he said. Each transfer creates another layer between the original source and the final asset. It makes the money look less connected to Eric. Is that illegal? Multiple entities are not illegal. Business owners use them for liability protection, partnerships, and tax planning. The issue is whether marital funds were intentionally concealed and whether the stated business purposes were genuine. Rebecca leaned back in her chair. If this was designed to place assets beyond Stephanie's reach before a divorce, the structure becomes highly relevant. I looked at the whiteboard. The diagram was simple enough to understand, but the intention behind it was devastating. Eric had not merely opened a secret account. He had helped create distance between himself and the money, one company at a time. The sophistication meant planning. It meant conversations, documents, and decisions repeated over years. It meant every time he transferred a small amount, he knew where it would eventually go. David traced 3 properties. The first was a small rental duplex purchased through an entity called Pine Court Investments. The second was a commercial unit held by West Elm Property Group. The third took longer to identify because the company name appeared only in a loan document tied to Harbor Ridge. Brightwater Holdings. The name sounded harmless, almost peaceful. David asked for several more days. During that time, Eric continued discussing retirement. He sent me a listing for a house in South Carolina with a wide porch and a view of marshland. "What do you think?" he asked. "It's beautiful. Too isolated. Maybe. We could use somewhere quiet." The word use felt strange. I wondered whether he was testing my willingness to leave our home. Perhaps he wanted me excited about selling. Perhaps the listing was merely a distraction while a different property already existed. I asked why he had become interested in moving so suddenly. He shrugged. "I've spent years thinking about clients' futures. I should think about ours." I smiled. Inside, I heard the echo of more than $340,000 moving through companies I had never known existed. David called on Thursday evening. Eric was supposedly at a late meeting with Ashford Group. The timing felt almost cruel. "I found Brightwater," David said. Something in his voice made me sit down. "Is it another company?" "It owns a property. I would prefer to show you the records tomorrow with Rebecca present. Can you tell me what kind of property?" "A pause. A lake house." The word entered the room and changed the air. "Where?" "2 states away." "Who owns it?" "Brightwater Holdings is the legal owner. Natalie Brooks is the listed manager. And Eric, his name does not appear on the deed." "Then how is it connected to him?" "The initial capital can be traced through Meridian. There is also a loan contribution originating from funds transferred out of his business reserve account." I closed my eyes. "How long ago was it purchased?" 18 months. 18 months earlier, Eric and I had spent our anniversary at a small hotel by the coast. He had given me a silver bracelet and told me he could not imagine growing old with anyone else. At almost the same time, money from our marriage had helped purchase a lake house controlled by Natalie. The following morning, I sat across from Rebecca and David while the property record lay between us. Brightwater Holdings had purchased the house for just under $600,000. The property included 4 bedrooms, a private dock, and nearly 2 acres of land. Online photographs showed a stone fireplace, wide windows facing the lake, and a kitchen larger than ours. It did not look like a casual investment. It looked like a home. David explained the financial trail slowly. Eric's business transferred money to Meridian over several months. Meridian moved a portion to Harbor Ridge Partners. Harbor Ridge recorded the funds as consulting revenue and later issued a business loan to Brightwater Holdings. Brightwater used that loan as part of the initial capital contribution for the lake house. Additional payments connected to the property, insurance, repairs, and management fees could also be traced back through companies linked to Natalie. "How much of the purchase came from Eric?" Rebecca asked. "I can establish at least $210,000 directly connected to his funds, possibly more." "Mortgage. Held through a private lender." "Who makes the payments?" "An account controlled by Brightwater, funded partly by rental income and partly by transfers from Harbor Ridge." "Is it rented?" "Occasionally, according to public listings. But the calendar shows long private blocks during which it is unavailable." I looked at the photographs again. The private dock. The bedroom facing the water. The dining table set for 6. Had Eric been there? Had Natalie? Had they stood together in that kitchen discussing the future while I believed he was meeting clients? I wanted to ask whether they had slept there, but the question suddenly seemed too small. The betrayal was no longer confined to physical intimacy. Eric had taken income earned during our marriage and transformed it into walls, land, furniture, and a view of the lake, all held beyond my knowledge. Even if he had never touched Natalie romantically, he had built something with her that should have belonged to our shared future. Rebecca watched me carefully. "You do not need to decide today what their personal relationship is." "How can that not matter?" "It matters emotionally. Legally, the financial structure is more important. She owns a house with money from my marriage. An entity she controls owns it. That distinction does not make me feel better. It should not, but it helps us understand how the concealment works." I looked at David. Could Eric claim this was just an investment? He can claim anything. The strength of that explanation would depend on the business purpose, ownership, interest disclosure, and whether the arrangement benefited his firm. Did it? I have found no agreement giving Eric a documented stake in Brightwater. On paper, he transferred money away and received no visible asset in return. Why would he do that? David's answer was careful. Either he made an extraordinarily poor series of business decisions, or his interest exists somewhere outside the public documents. Rebecca closed the property folder. This is deliberate, Stephanie. The companies are structured to remove Eric's name while preserving practical access or future benefit. A future benefit, a property he may intend to use control or claim later once the marital assets have been divided. The meaning became clear. If Eric filed for divorce after enough money had moved, our visible assets would appear smaller. Meridian's payments might be described as legitimate business expenses. The lake house would belong to Brightwater, not to him. Natalie could hold it until the divorce ended, after which Eric's practical relationship to the property could emerge. He had built an exit that depended on my ignorance. What happens if we confront him now? I asked. Rebecca and David exchanged a glance. He may attempt to explain the transactions, she said. He may also move remaining funds, alter agreements, create documents, or pressure Natalie to change the structure. Then what do? We protect you first. Over the next several days, Rebecca began preparing what she called protective measures. We verified the title to the house and documented its current equity. She reviewed whether Eric could borrow against it or attempt to force a sale without my consent. We identified every joint account and noted current balances so any sudden movement would be visible. David completed a preliminary asset tracing report. I gathered evidence showing that Eric's business had been created and grown during our marriage. My income had supported household expenses during its early years. I had paid the mortgage while he rebuilt his client base after leaving his previous employer. The business funds were not separate from our shared life simply because his name appeared on the company. Rebecca also advised me to redirect future payments from my design clients into the account I had opened. Keep invoices and tax records, she said. Transparency protects you. We are not hiding anything. We are ensuring that you retain access to money for ordinary expenses if the joint accounts become unstable. The distinction mattered to me. I was not constructing a secret life. I was creating enough stability to survive the collapse of the one I already had. At home, I behaved as normally as possible. Eric brought flowers again, this time yellow tulips. He fixed a loose cabinet hinge. He asked whether I wanted to spend a weekend at a resort in the mountains. Each gesture arrived wrapped in uncertainty. Perhaps he still cared for me. Perhaps kindness was part of the cover. Perhaps both things were true. One evening, we sat on the sofa watching a film neither of us followed closely. Eric placed his arm around me and pulled me against his shoulder. I'm grateful for you, he said. The words nearly broke my composure. For what? For everything. You've always made life steady. Steady. That was what I had believed we were. I rested my head against him because pulling away would have revealed too much. He kissed my hair. For several minutes we remained like that, looking like a married couple whose future was secure. Inside my mind, I saw the lake house. I saw money leaving his accounts month after month. I saw Natalie's name on Meridian and Brightwater. I understood then that Eric's plan depended not only on secrecy but on my continued emotional participation. He needed me to remain the steady wife, to maintain the home, to trust his explanations, and perhaps eventually to agree that selling our house was best for both of us. He was not simply preparing to leave. He was arranging the conditions under which I might unknowingly help him do it. The following morning, Rebecca called me back to her office. She had placed David's report inside a thick folder. What happens next depends on what you want, she said. I want to understand everything. We already understand enough to describe the structure. Eric diverted more than $340,000 from business income into Meridian over 5 years. Meridian is owned by Natalie Brooks. The funds then moved through additional entities and into real estate, including a lake house controlled by Natalie. Do we know whether he is having an affair? No. The answer surprised me by how little it mattered now. I had spent the first weeks imagining the betrayal as another woman taking my husband's affection. That possibility still hurt, but it was no longer the center of the story. Eric had taken something more fundamental. He had removed my right to make informed decisions about my own future. He had sat across from me during financial discussions while knowing the numbers were incomplete. He had encouraged me to save delay plans and trust his expertise while he directed marital income elsewhere. He had spoken about retirement as though we were building toward the same destination. We were not. Rebecca opened the folder to the Brightwater documents. "He is not just betraying you," she said. "He is building a future in which you are left behind without understanding where your share of the life you created has gone." I looked at the property photograph one final time. The lake was smooth beneath a pale sky. A wooden dock extended from the shore. Through the wide windows, the house appeared warm, private, and ready for someone to arrive. For weeks, I had asked myself who Natalie was to Eric. Now I understood that the more important question was what they were building together. Whatever name they gave their relationship, it had already become a second financial life. And every part of that life had been constructed with the expectation that I would never discover it. Once the lake house had been traced back to Eric's money, the question was no longer whether he had betrayed me. The only question left was how much damage he had already prepared, and whether I could stop him before he realized I knew. Rebecca did not allow me to move too quickly. The morning after she showed me the Brightwater Holdings records, she asked David to leave the conference room so she could speak with me alone. The thick folder containing 5 years of transfers remained on the table between us. Beside it lay photographs of the lake house, the Meridian formation documents, and the diagram showing how the money had traveled through company after company until Eric's name disappeared. Rebecca closed the door. "What do you want to happen next?" she asked. The question sounded simple, but I had no simple answer. "I want him to admit it." "That is understandable. I want to know why." "You may never receive an answer that satisfies you. I want to make sure he cannot move anything else. That is something we can control." Her distinction mattered. There were emotional outcomes I wanted and legal outcomes I could actually secure. The first depended on Eric's honesty, and honesty was the one thing he had already shown me I could not rely upon. The second depended on evidence, timing, and preparation. Rebecca opened a legal pad. "We need to separate what you hope he will say from what must be done before he knows the investigation exists." She wrote several headings: asset preservation, financial disclosure, property protection, business records, divorce preparation. Seeing the words in ink made my chest tighten. "Do we have to file for divorce immediately?" I asked. "No, but we should prepare as though we might." "That sounds like the same thing." "It is not. Preparation gives you options. Delay without preparation gives him options." I looked down at the folder. "What can we do without warning him?" Rebecca explained the process carefully. "We could document the current balances of joint accounts and identify sudden movements. We could prepare an emergency request to prevent further transfer of assets once the filing became active. We could demand full disclosure of business records, related companies, loans, investments, and property interests. We could preserve David's tracing report and attach the relevant portions to a formal petition if necessary. Some measures would remain ready but unfiled until the confrontation. Others could be initiated in a way that would take effect quickly enough to prevent Eric from emptying accounts or restructuring ownership once he realized the scheme had been discovered. "He will know eventually," I said. "Yes. How much time would he have after he knows?" "If we coordinate this properly, almost none." Rebecca's tone was calm, but the meaning was powerful. For 5 years, Eric had controlled the timing. He chose when to transfer money, when to meet Natalie, when to invent client names, and when to speak about retirement. My ignorance had given him room to move. Now we were removing that room. Over the next 2 weeks, Rebecca built the legal structure around the evidence David had gathered. She drafted a petition requesting protection of marital property. It identified the house joint accounts, retirement funds, investment holdings, and the business income Eric had generated during the marriage. It also described the suspected diversion of assets through Meridian Consulting Group and the companies connected to it. She prepared a request requiring Eric to disclose every account he owned or controlled directly or indirectly. That wording was important. An account did not need to carry his name if he could influence its use. A property did not need to appear on his personal balance sheet if he had funded it and expected to benefit from it. A business arrangement could not be treated as separate simply because Natalie or one of her companies stood between Eric and the asset. Rebecca also drafted an order that would prevent the sale, transfer, borrowing, concealment, or destruction of marital property once filed. David supplied the supporting financial analysis. His report was not emotional. It contained no accusations about love, loyalty, or marriage. It simply showed numbers, dates, amounts, source accounts, recipient entities, secondary transfers, property purchases. The cold precision of the document was more devastating than anger. It demonstrated that this was not one mistaken payment or a poorly documented business deal. Eric had made the same choice repeatedly over 5 years. The amounts varied. The descriptions changed. The destination remained connected to Natalie. David built appendices containing copies of invoices, account summaries, formation records, loan documents, property filings, and diagrams of the fund movements. Every conclusion led to a document. Every document led to another. By the time the report was complete, Eric's plan no longer looked sophisticated. It looked visible. Rebecca then drafted the divorce petition. She did not ask me to sign immediately. The unsigned document remained in a folder on her desk for 3 days while I tried to understand what signing it would mean. I had known for weeks that the marriage I believed in no longer existed in the form I had trusted. Still, the petition made the end official in a way the bank records had not. 19 years could be described on a few pages. Date of marriage. Property acquired. Grounds for dissolution. Requested division of assets. The document contained no mention of Saturday mornings, my mother's illness, our first apartment, or the way Eric once slept in a hospital chair beside me. It did not describe the years when we had loved each other, honestly assuming those years had existed. The law reduced our life to facts that could be divided. Perhaps that was necessary. Facts were safer than memories now. On the 3rd day, I returned to Rebecca's office and signed. My hand remained steady until the final page. Afterward, I placed the pen on the table and stared at my signature. I thought I would feel something larger, I said. What do you feel? Tired. Rebecca closed the folder. That is common. Does signing mean it is over? It means you are prepared to end it. What happens next will determine the timing. I nodded. The divorce petition was placed inside a sealed envelope with the protective orders and financial disclosure documents. For the first time since Riverside Market, I had something Eric did not expect. Not suspicion. Not questions. A finished response. At home, the legal preparations were invisible. Eric continued living inside the marriage he believed he controlled. He came home carrying groceries and asked me to help unload the car. He stood in the kitchen comparing 2 brands of pasta sauce as though the decision mattered. He discussed replacing the deck boards before winter and asked whether I wanted to choose the stain. On Sunday mornings, he still made coffee. Sometimes he cooked dinner. He had always enjoyed cooking when he was not rushed, moving around the kitchen with surprising confidence while music played from his phone. He chopped vegetables, tasted sauces, and complained that I never followed recipes correctly. You treat measurements like suggestions, he told me one evening. They are suggestions. That explains why nothing you cook tastes the same twice. You still eat it. I'm a loyal man. The sentence hung between us. Eric smiled because he did not hear what I heard. I turned toward the sink before my face could reveal anything. Living beside him became an exercise in holding 2 realities at once. In one reality, he was the man I had known for 19 years. He remembered when I had difficult client presentations. He refilled my car when the fuel light came on. He knew that I disliked loud restaurants and always requested a quiet table without asking. In the other, he had redirected more than $340,000 into a structure designed to exclude me. Neither reality erased the other. That was what made the betrayal so difficult to process. If Eric had become cruel in every part of his life, leaving him would have been emotionally simpler. I could have taken every memory and labeled it false. But people were rarely that cleanly divided. He could care whether I slept well and still plan a future that depended on my financial ignorance. He could love me in one limited selfish way while betraying me in another. Understanding that did not make me forgive him. It made me stop waiting for a single explanation that would make everything consistent. One evening, we sat together on the sofa while a film played on television. I could not have described the plot if someone had asked. My attention remained fixed on the weight of Eric's arm across my shoulders. He pulled me closer. I'm grateful for you, he said. I felt my body become still. For what? For this. For us. His eyes remained on the screen. You've always made everything steady. There was that word again. Steady. I had once been proud that our marriage felt stable. Now I understood that my steadiness had made his deception easier. He had trusted me to maintain the home, believe his explanations, and preserve the shape of our life while he quietly created another one. I looked at his profile. Do you ever think about how different our lives could have been? He glanced at me. What do you mean? If we had made different choices. Everyone thinks about that. Do you? Sometimes. What do you imagine? His expression softened. Nothing dramatic. A different city, maybe. Fewer responsibilities. More freedom. Freedom from what? He smiled slightly. Everything that comes with getting older. The answer was vague enough to avoid meaning anything. I wondered whether the lake house existed in his mind when he spoke. Did he picture waking there beside Natalie? Did he imagine sitting on the dock after our divorce, the property protected behind several layers of companies? Or did he think of the place purely as an investment, something that would become useful after he escaped the financial obligations of our marriage? I did not ask. Questions at home would only give him time to shape answers. Instead, I rested my head against his shoulder. It was not affection. It was strategy. The distinction made me feel cold. I worried that remaining close to him made me dishonest. I worried that allowing him to believe in the safety of our routine was a form of manipulation. Rebecca dismissed that concern. You are not required to warn someone that you have discovered his deception before protecting yourself from it. But I'm pretending nothing has changed. He created the conditions that made that necessary. I still feel as though I'm becoming like him. No, she said. Eric concealed information to gain an advantage over you. You are preserving information to prevent him from taking one. I repeated that distinction whenever guilt surfaced. At the same time, the secrecy required more discipline each day. I stored no legal papers at home. The black notebook remained in Rebecca's office. Copies of financial documents were kept on encrypted drives and in secure storage. I deleted call histories when Rebecca contacted me. I avoided unusual searches on our shared network and stopped carrying printed evidence in my handbag. Eric noticed none of it. His confidence became almost insulting. He discussed selling the house more frequently. He sent me listings in Arizona and South Carolina. He suggested meeting with a real estate agent in the spring just to understand the market. I responded with cautious interest. Maybe, I said. We don't have to decide immediately. Of course not. The right buyer might make the decision for us. That sentence stayed with me. Perhaps Eric planned to create momentum. Once the house was listed and an offer arrived refusing to sell, might make me appear unreasonable. If the proceeds entered accounts, he controlled the largest asset we owned could become easier to divide, redirect, or hide. He was still moving forward. He simply did not know the path had been blocked. Rebecca proposed the confrontation during a Thursday meeting. She waited until David had finished explaining the final version of his report. Then she closed the folder and looked at me. I think it is time to place them in the same room. Them, Eric and Natalie. The thought sent a wave of anxiety through me. Why together? Because separate confrontations allow them to coordinate afterward. If Eric knows first, he can call Natalie before we reach her. If Natalie knows first, she can destroy records or prepare an explanation with him. What would the meeting accomplish? It would force both of them to respond without knowing what the other intends to say. David nodded. People who share a financial arrangement usually rely on a common narrative. Surprise disrupts that. I imagined Eric entering a room and seeing Natalie. The image felt almost theatrical, but Rebecca's purpose was not drama. It was control. Would they come voluntarily, I asked. Eric will come if you tell him you need to discuss family finances. Natalie can be invited under the pretext of a business matter involving Meridian's banking relationships. Is that legal? We are not compelling her to attend or making false legal threats. We are requesting a private meeting concerning financial transactions involving her company. What if she refuses? Then we proceed without her and contact her through formal channels. And if they both come, we present the evidence. You decide what you want to say. David and I remain nearby until the appropriate moment. Why nearby? Because I want you to begin. The answer surprised me. I thought you would confront them. This is your marriage. Your money. Your decision. I will handle the legal consequences, but Eric needs to understand that you discovered the truth and acted on it before he had a chance to control the conversation. I looked toward the window. Once Eric saw the documents, there would be no return to the strange calm of our house. No more pretending that Saturday mornings were still ordinary. No more quiet observation. The investigation would become a conflict. Rebecca seemed to read my hesitation. After the meeting, you may no longer be able to live under the same roof safely or comfortably. We should prepare for that. I don't think he would hurt me. I am not suggesting he will, but emotional behavior can become unpredictable when someone loses control of money and narrative at the same time. We discussed practical arrangements. I could stay with my sister for several nights, but I did not want to leave the house and create any suggestion that I had abandoned it. Rebecca recommended changing the locks only if legally appropriate and making sure someone knew where I was after the confrontation. She also arranged for the protective filing to become effective at the correct time. Eric would not have a long window in which to react. The accounts David had identified would be flagged for preservation. Any attempt to move substantial funds would become visible. Full disclosure demands would follow. The meeting was scheduled for a Tuesday afternoon. I rented a private conference room in a business center downtown. The space occupied the fourth floor of a building used by lawyers, consultants, and small financial firms. No company name appeared prominently in the lobby. Visitors checked in at a simple reception desk and took an elevator to whichever room had been reserved. The conference room was deliberately neutral. Glass walls faced a quiet hallway, though adjustable blinds could provide privacy. A long table occupied the center. 8 black chairs stood evenly around it. A flat screen hung on one wall and a framed abstract print decorated another. On the table sat 8 unopened bottles of water. The lighting was cool and slightly too bright. Nothing in the room belonged to my marriage. There were no photographs, familiar objects, or corners where memory could soften me. Eric could not look at the kitchen we had renovated and remind me of the person he used to be. He could not stand beside our wedding portrait or sit in the chair where he had comforted me after my mother died. It was simply a room. Facts would enter it. Whatever remained of our marriage would leave differently. The night before the meeting, Eric made dinner. He prepared roasted chicken with herbs and potatoes, one of the first meals he had learned to cook after we married. The smell filled the kitchen while rain tapped against the windows. "You're quiet," he said. "Long day. Problem client. Aren't they all?" He laughed. I watched him move between the counter and stove. For a few seconds, the entire investigation seemed impossible. This was Eric. My husband. The man who knew which pan I preferred and how much salt I thought was too much. How could this ordinary person be the same man whose money had flowed through shell company into a lake house owned by someone else? Then his phone vibrated. He glanced at the screen and turned it face down. The movement restored the truth. After dinner, he asked what time our financial meeting was the next day. 3. Why downtown? I wanted a private room. This is important. He studied me briefly. Should I be worried? You should come prepared to listen. My answer caused a small change in his face. Not fear. Interest. Is this about selling the house? Partly. That was enough to reassure him. Good, he said. We should finally make a plan. I slept very little. Eric's breathing remained steady beside me. Several times I turned and looked at him in the dark. I tried to remember the last night I had gone to sleep without wondering who he really was. By morning, the sadness had settled into something calmer. I did not need him to become a villain in every memory. I only needed to stop allowing the man he had once been to protect the man he had chosen to become. I arrived at the conference room 25 minutes early. Rebecca and David were in a smaller office down the hallway. They had copies of every document and would enter once I reached the appropriate point. I arranged the evidence myself. First, the 5-year transfer summary. Next, the Meridian invoices. Then the corporate filing identifying Natalie as owner. After that, records for Northline Strategy and Harbor Ridge Partners. The 3 property companies followed. Brightwater Holdings came last. I placed a photograph of the lake house beside the property record. David's flowchart lay at the center of the table. The sealed legal envelope remained with Rebecca. When I finished, the documents formed a visible path from Eric's business account to the house by the lake. I stood at the end of the table and looked at them. For weeks, these papers had represented confusion. Now they represented control. At 2:56, the receptionist called to say Eric had arrived. He entered wearing the charcoal suit he used for important clients. For one irrational moment, I remembered watching him enter Bellamy's in the same suit. He closed the door behind him and looked at the table. What is all this? Sit down. His eyebrows lifted. Stefania, please. He pulled out a chair across from me. His gaze moved over the folders. The first page visible to him contained columns of transfer amounts, but he was too far away to read the details. He loosened his tie. I thought we were discussing the house. We are discussing our finances. Why do we need a conference room? Because I wanted somewhere private. We have a private home. Not for this conversation. The confidence in his expression weakened slightly. He leaned back. All right, what is going on? I did not answer. I looked toward the door. Eric followed my gaze. Are we waiting for someone? Yes. Who? Before I could respond, the door opened. Natalie stepped into the room. She wore a dark blue blazer cream blouse and black trousers. A leather bag hung from one shoulder. Her phone was still in her hand. She took one step inside, saw Eric, and stopped. The change in her face lasted less than a second, but I saw it clearly. Surprise. Calculation. Fear. Eric became completely still. Neither of them spoke. Natalie looked at him first, then at me, then at the documents on the table. A silent message passed between them. It was not affection. It was the recognition that whatever separation they had maintained between their secret arrangement and Eric's marriage no longer existed. "What is this?" Natalie asked. Her voice remained professional but slightly strained. "Please sit down," I said. She did not move. "I was told this concerned Meridian's banking relationships." "It does." She looked at Eric again. He gave the smallest shake of his head. The gesture was almost invisible, but its meaning was clear. "Do not say anything." I felt something settle inside me. They were already communicating without words, already trying to control the damage. I gestured toward the empty chair beside Eric. "Sit." Natalie placed her bag on the chair farthest from him instead. That choice interested me. She wanted distance now. For several seconds, no one spoke. I had imagined this moment many times. In some versions, I shouted. In others, I demanded that Natalie explain why she had taken money from my marriage. Sometimes I threw the lake house photograph across the table. The reality was quieter. Silence did more than anger. Eric did not know how much I understood. Natalie did not know what Eric had told me. Neither knew whether the other had already admitted anything. Their uncertainty worked in my favor. I sat at the head of the table. "You both know each other," I said. It was not a question. Natalie folded her hands. "Eric's firm has engaged Meridian for consulting services." Eric nodded quickly. "That's right. How long?" "Several years," he said. 5. He looked at the first set of documents. "Approximately. You have met at Riverside Market." Neither answered. "You have met at Bellamy's." Eric's eyes shifted toward me. "You followed me. I observed you." His expression hardened. "That is not an answer. It is the only one you need right now." Natalie remained quiet. I pulled the first summary toward the center of the table. This record shows payments from Eric's consulting business to Meridian Consulting Group over 5 years. Eric leaned forward. "Those are legitimate business expenses. There are 58 months of payments. That does not make them illegitimate. The total is $342,860. Natalie's face changed. Only slightly. Her gaze moved from the total to Eric. I wondered whether she had known the complete amount, or whether she had only seen pieces of the flow. Eric recovered quickly. "Meridian has performed extensive advisory work." "What work?" "Business strategy, client restructuring, investment analysis." I placed several invoices on the table. "These?" "Yes. They contain no project descriptions, no hours, no named consultants, and no deliverables. That is common in private consulting arrangements." "Is it?" "Stephanie, you do not understand how these agreements are structured. The sentence might have controlled me once. It no longer did. I understand that the invoice metadata does not consistently match the dates printed on the pages." His mouth tightened. "Who told you that?" I ignored the question. I turned to Natalie. "Did Meridian create these invoices?" She glanced at Eric before answering. "My company issued them. Before or after the payments. They correspond to services performed." That was not my question. Her posture became more rigid. "I would have to review the records." "You should have them." "It is your company." Eric interrupted. "This meeting is becoming unnecessarily hostile." "No," I said. "It is becoming specific." I placed the Meridian formation document beside the invoices. Natalie Brooks, founding member and sole owner. Natalie looked down at the page. I continued. "Money entered Meridian from Eric's business account. It then moved into Northline Strategy and Harbor Ridge Partners." I placed the next records on the table. "These entities are also connected to you." "Connected does not mean owned," she said. "No. Sometimes it means managed through an associate. Sometimes it means routed through a family trust. But the bank records show that Meridian's money moved into both." Eric leaned forward. "Where did you obtain bank records?" "That question will be addressed later. This is confidential business information. It is marital financial information when the source is income earned during our marriage." His face hardened. "You are making assumptions." I pulled David's flowchart into view. "No. I am following the money." For the first time, Eric looked genuinely alarmed. The diagram was simple enough that he understood immediately how much had been traced. "His business account." Meridian, Northline, Harbor Ridge. 3 property companies, each arrow connected by dates and amounts. Natalie reached for one of the pages, but I placed my hand on it. You may look. You may not remove anything. Her eyes met mine. There was no apology in them. There was caution. I presented the first 2 properties. The rental duplex. The commercial unit. Eric attempted to explain them as part of an investment strategy. You never disclosed an investment interest in either property, I said. Because the investments belong to Meridian. Then why did your business provide the capital? It was part of a broader partnership. Where is the partnership agreement? There are multiple agreements. Show me one that gives you an ownership interest. His silence answered. I placed the Brightwater Holdings record on the table. Then the photograph of the lake house. Natalie looked away. Eric stared at the image. This property was purchased 18 months ago, I said. Brightwater Holdings is the legal owner. Natalie is the listed manager. It is an investment property, Eric said, with at least $210,000 traced directly back to your business. That figure is misleading. Explain why. The money passed through several legitimate entities. Passing through more companies does not change where it began. You are oversimplifying complex transactions. No, you made them complex so they would be difficult to follow. The room became silent again. Eric looked at me differently now. The confidence he had carried into the room was disappearing. He was no longer speaking to a wife he could overwhelm with financial terminology. He was trying to determine who had helped me and how much they knew. Who else has seen these documents, he asked. I did not answer. Stefania. All the necessary people. Natalie reached for her bag. I am not comfortable continuing without counsel. You are free to leave. She paused. I looked at her. But if you leave now, the next request for records will not be informal. Her hand remained on the bag. Eric turned toward her. Natalie, sit down. The tone was revealing. Not affectionate. Commanding. She looked at him with irritation rather than loyalty. For the first time I saw a fracture between them. Whatever they had built depended on control and mutual benefit. Now that the structure was exposed, neither seemed willing to protect the other automatically. Natalie sat again. Eric turned back to me. I can explain all of this. You have had 5 years to explain it. I could not discuss confidential arrangements. You discussed selling our house. That has nothing to do with this. It has everything to do with this. I pushed the property valuation toward him. You began encouraging me to sell our largest visible asset while you were transferring income into property held outside our names. His face lost some color. That is not what happened. Then tell me what happened. I was planning for our future. Our future. Yes. In a house owned by Natalie's company, it was an investment vehicle. With no documented ownership interest for you. He hesitated. That would have been formalized later. When the structure was complete, the answer came before he realized what he had admitted. I watched the realization cross his face. When the structure was complete, I repeated. He looked away. There it was. Not a misunderstanding. Not an accounting error. A structure still being built. Eric attempted to recover. These things take time. There were tax considerations, liability issues, business risks. I was trying to create something secure. For whom? For us. Then why was I excluded from every document? He opened his mouth. No answer came. I had expected the moment to feel victorious. It did not. Watching him fail to explain the obvious did not restore anything. It only confirmed that he had believed my trust would last longer than his plan required. I looked at Natalie. Did you believe this was for our marriage? Her expression remained guarded. My role was to advise on business opportunities. Did you know the money came from marital income? I knew it came from Eric's business. That was not the question. I did not review the details of your marriage, but you helped move the money through several companies. I facilitated transactions requested by a client. Were you compensated? Yes. From Meridian. Among other sources. Did you expect an interest in Brightwater? She did not answer. Eric looked at her. That glance told me enough. Natalie's role had not been neutral. Whether she was Eric's lover-partner or both, she had expected to benefit. Eric tried again. This has been presented in the worst possible way. I presented bank records. You presented a narrative. You created the narrative. David only followed it. The moment I said his name, Eric's eyes narrowed. David. The conference room door opened. Rebecca entered first carrying a leather folder. David followed with a second copy of the financial report. The effect on Eric was immediate. Until that point, some part of him had apparently hoped I had assembled the evidence alone and misunderstood it. Rebecca's presence ended that possibility. David's report made the situation larger than a marital argument. Eric recognized Rebecca as a lawyer before she introduced herself. He looked from her to David, then back at me. The color drained from his face. Rebecca took the chair beside me. "Mr. Adams, I am Rebecca Lawson. I represent Stephanie." David sat at the opposite end of the table. "My name is David Chen. I am the forensic accountant who prepared the asset tracing report." Natalie stood. "I was not informed attorneys would be present. You were invited to discuss transactions involving your company," Rebecca said. "You are not required to remain. However, formal disclosure requests concerning Meridian, Northline, Harbor Ridge, and Brightwater will follow." Natalie sat again, though slowly. Rebecca placed the complete report on the table. "Everything Stephanie has presented has been reviewed against available bank statements, corporate filings, property records, tax documents, and business invoices." Eric's voice became quieter. "You accessed confidential information." "Stephanie provided documents she was legally entitled to access," Rebecca replied. "Public records supplied the corporate and property information. Additional records will be obtained through lawful disclosure. You cannot prove concealment." David spoke for the first time. "The transfer pattern spans 5 years. Payments were divided into amounts categorized as vague professional services. Meridian passed substantial portions through related entities. Those funds were then used to capitalize property holding companies in which you have no disclosed formal interest." Eric turned toward him. "That does not prove intent." "No," David said. "Your communications agreements and undisclosed beneficial interests will help establish intent." The calmness of his answer unsettled Eric more than an accusation would have. Rebecca opened her folder. "This is not a discussion about whether the records exist. They do. The issue is what happens next." Eric looked at me. His expression had changed completely. For 19 years I had seen him in many forms, confident, tired, angry, affectionate, worried. I had never seen him afraid of me. Not physically afraid. Afraid of what I knew. "Stephanie," he said, lowering his voice. "Can we speak privately?" "No. This is our marriage. It was our money. Natalie should leave. She is part of the financial structure. You don't know what she is part of. Then explain it in front of her." He looked toward Natalie. She did not defend him. Rebecca withdrew the sealed envelope. She placed it on the table and pushed it toward Eric. "This contains the documents relevant to your immediate position." He stared at it. "What documents?" "Open it." His hands remained still for several seconds. Then he broke the seal. The first document was the asset protection request. He read the title, then turned the page quickly. His eyes moved across the restrictions on transfer sale, borrowing, destruction of records, and changes to ownership. The second document required disclosure of accounts, entities, loans, property interests, and transactions involving Meridian and the companies linked to it. The third was the divorce petition. Already signed. Eric stopped moving. His eyes remained on my signature. The silence that followed felt different from the earlier ones. Before he had been calculating how to recover control, now he understood that decisions had already been made without him. "You filed this?" he asked. "Some protective measures are being initiated," Rebecca said. "The remaining documents will proceed according to the legal timetable." He looked at me. "You signed a divorce petition without speaking to me. You transferred more than $340,000 without speaking to me. This is different." "Yes," I said. "Mine is documented and visible." His jaw tightened. "You had no right to set me up like this." For a second, I almost laughed. "You met Natalie in a restricted supermarket corridor. You created fake client explanations. You moved money through companies for 5 years. And you believe this meeting is the setup? You do not understand the full situation." "I understand enough." "No, you don't." He pushed the papers away. "I was going to explain everything." "When?" "When the time was right." "For whom?" "For both of us. The time would have been right when the money was gone, the house was sold, and every document benefited you." "That is not fair." "Fair." The word escaped more sharply than I intended. I lowered my voice. "You sat across from me during financial discussions and showed me an incomplete version of our life. You told me to save money while you transferred it elsewhere. You encouraged me to imagine retirement with you while preparing property I could not see. I was trying to protect the future. You were trying to control it. I never meant to hurt you. The sentence was so familiar, so inadequate that it made me tired. Harm does not disappear because you plan to explain it later. He leaned forward. Stephanie, listen to me. The business had risks you did not understand. I needed flexibility. Natalie had access to structures and opportunities I could not create directly. The properties were meant to produce income. For you? For us? Then why does nothing identify me? It would have. When? Eventually. After I signed away the house. His face changed again. He had not expected me to connect those elements so directly. That was not the plan. What was the plan? He looked around the room as though an answer might exist among the papers. I needed more time. You had 5 years. I was building something. Yes, I said. A future that worked only if I never discovered it. He became quiet. That sentence reached him in a way the numbers had not. For the first time, he looked less like a financial consultant defending transactions and more like a husband who understood that the story he had told himself could no longer survive. Perhaps he had believed he was protecting something. Perhaps he had imagined that one day after the accounts and properties were secured, he would explain the entire structure and expect me to accept it. Maybe he had convinced himself that because he had not yet left, he had not truly betrayed me. But his imagined confession required my ignorance to continue until the exact moment he chose to end it. It required me to trust him while he removed my choices. Natalie stood again. This time no one stopped her. She picked up her leather bag and placed the strap over her shoulder. Rebecca looked at her. You will receive formal requests concerning the records. Natalie gave a small nod. She avoided my eyes. I had wondered for weeks what I would say to her. I had imagined asking whether she loved Eric, whether she had entered my home through stories he told her, whether she knew what the stolen money had cost me. In that moment, none of those questions mattered. She looked at Eric once. There was no tenderness in the glance. Only calculation and disappointment. He had failed to protect the arrangement. Whatever alliance existed between them had been strongest while it was profitable and hidden. Exposure changed it instantly. Natalie opened the door. Before she left, I spoke. Did you ever intend to tell me? She stopped. Her back remained toward me. For a moment, I thought she might answer. She did not. She walked into the hallway and closed the door behind her. Her silence told me more than denial would have. Eric watched the door. You did not need to bring her here. Yes, I did. You humiliated both of us. I presented the truth privately. You planned this. I prepared for it. That is the same thing. No. Planning is what you did for 5 years. Preparation is what I did after I found out. He looked at the divorce petition again. The confidence had left him completely now. I love you, he said. The words entered the room too late. I believed that in some limited way he might mean them. Love was not always pure enough to prevent selfishness. A person could feel attachment, gratitude, familiarity, and even tenderness while still choosing himself at every decisive moment. But love without honesty had become another word Eric used to shape reality. You may love the life I made possible for you, I said. That is not the same as protecting me inside it. I can fix this. The accounts are being preserved. I mean us. I looked at him. There is no version of us that exists outside what you did. He lowered his eyes. For several minutes, the only sound in the room came from the ventilation system. Rebecca and David remained silent. They understood that the legal discussion had ended, and the personal one had reached its final point. Eric gathered the documents from the envelope, though his movements were slow and uncertain. He read the first page of the divorce petition once more. When he reached my signature, he stopped. I watched him understand what had happened. While he met Natalie at Bellamy's, I had recorded the dates. While he discussed selling our house, I had verified the deed. While he spoke about retirement, David had traced the transfers. While he brought me flowers, Rebecca had prepared the orders. While he slept beside me, believing I knew nothing, I had moved several steps ahead. He had mistaken my silence for weakness. He had mistaken trust for ignorance. Most of all, he had mistaken the woman who loved him for someone who would remain passive once that love was used against her. Eric looked up. When did you decide? The night I understood the lake house was real. He absorbed the answer. What happens now? Now you disclose everything. And after that, we separate the truth from whatever story you were planning to tell. He looked toward Rebecca. Is there any room for negotiation? There is always room to resolve legal issues responsibly, she said. There is no room to continue concealing assets. He nodded faintly. For the first time in the meeting, he did not argue. He placed the documents back inside the envelope and stood. At the door, he turned toward me. I saw grief in his face then. Perhaps it was grief for the marriage. Perhaps it was grief for the future he had lost, or the plan that had failed. I no longer felt responsible for determining which. "Are you coming home?" he asked. "Not with you." He looked as though he wanted to say more. Instead, he left. The door closed. I remained seated. I had imagined that exposing him would create a rush of satisfaction. I thought I might feel powerful, vindicated, even relieved. What I felt was quieter. The room was still cold. The water bottles remained unopened. The documents remained arranged across the table, though several had shifted beneath Eric's hands. Nothing dramatic had changed outside those walls. Cars continued moving below us. Elevators opened and closed. People answered phones in nearby offices. Yet the balance of my life had changed completely. Eric no longer controlled the information. He could not move the money unnoticed. He could not explain away the properties before the records were preserved. He could not decide when I deserved to know the truth. I had not defeated him. I had simply removed his ability to keep deciding my future without me. Rebecca touched the folder in front of her. "You did well." I looked at the empty chair where Eric had been sitting. "No," I said. "I was prepared." That felt more accurate. Strength had not looked the way I once imagined. It had not been shouting revenge or public humiliation. It had been waiting when I wanted to react. It had been documenting when I wanted to believe. It had been protecting myself before asking for an explanation. Most of all, it had been accepting that the man I loved could be both familiar and dangerous to my future, and choosing not to let familiarity win. I gathered the remaining copies into a single stack. On top lay the photograph of the lake house. For weeks, that image had represented the life Eric intended to build beyond me. Now it represented evidence. Nothing more. I turned it face down. Then I stood and walked out of the conference room with Rebecca beside me. Behind us, the table remained covered in the remains of a plan that had once depended entirely on my silence. The end of my marriage did not happen with a dramatic final argument. There was no shouting across a courtroom, no public exposure, no moment where Eric lost everything while I watched from a distance feeling satisfied. Real life was much quieter than that. It ended through documents, through scheduled meetings between attorneys, through financial statements, signatures, and long conversations about things that once belonged to a shared future. The months following the confrontation were exhausting, but they were no longer confusing. For the first time since Frank showed me the security footage at Riverside Market, I was not searching for missing pieces. I had the picture. I simply had to decide how to move forward from it. Rebecca handled the legal process with the same calm precision she had shown from the beginning. She never allowed anger to replace strategy. Every decision was based on records, evidence, and protecting what I had spent 19 years helping to build. Eric's attorneys tried several explanations. They argued that Meridian Consulting Group was a legitimate business relationship. They claimed the transfers were investments rather than concealed assets. They suggested the structure was complicated but not dishonest. David's report made those arguments difficult to maintain. The numbers did not respond to emotion. They did not change depending on who explained them. 5 years of transfers existed. More than $340,000 had moved through accounts and companies I had never been told about. Meridian belonged to Natalie Brooks. The money traveled through multiple entities. The lake house existed. Those were not opinions. They were facts. And facts were the one thing Eric could no longer rearrange. During the financial disclosure process, more details surfaced. None of them shocked me the way the first discoveries had. Perhaps there was a limit to how many times one person could feel the ground disappear beneath them. Additional accounts were identified. Business agreements were reviewed. Properties connected to the company's structure were evaluated. Every hidden piece was brought into the open. Natalie was required to explain her role in the companies she controlled. She maintained that everything had been part of business planning, that she had provided consulting services, and that Eric was responsible for explaining his personal financial situation to his wife. Maybe some of that was true. Maybe none of it was. Eventually, I stopped needing to know exactly where Eric's responsibility ended and hers began. The important part was that their decisions no longer determined my future. The money that had been moved was considered during the division of assets. The value connected to those transfers could not simply disappear because it had passed through several company names. The house remained mine. That mattered more than I expected. At first, I wondered whether staying there would trap me inside memories I needed to escape. Every room contained pieces of our marriage. The kitchen where Eric cooked dinner. The living room where we planned vacations. The bedroom where I once believed there were no secrets between us. But slowly I realized something. The house was not only his memory, it was mine. I had chosen the colors on the walls. I had designed the garden. I had spent weekends painting, repairing, decorating, and creating a place where people felt welcome. Eric's betrayal did not erase the years I invested there. Keeping the house was not about holding on to the past. It was about refusing to let someone else's choices take away everything I had built. When the divorce was finalized, people expected me to feel victorious. I did not. Victory was the wrong word. A marriage ending after 19 years is still a loss, even when leaving is the right decision. There were mornings when I missed ordinary things. The sound of another person moving around downstairs. 2 coffee cups beside the machine instead of 1. Someone asking what we should make for dinner. The absence of Eric was sometimes peaceful and painful at the same time. Healing was not a straight line. Some days I felt strong. Other days I sat in a silent house and wondered how much of my life I had misunderstood. But the difference was that the questions finally belonged to me. I was no longer waiting for Eric to provide answers. I was no longer watching a phone light up and wondering who was calling. I was no longer memorizing excuses or writing down inconsistencies. I was living. Many people assumed I wanted revenge. I understood why. The story sounded like the kind of betrayal that should end with destruction. A husband. Another woman. Hidden money. Secret properties. People expected anger to be the final chapter. But anger was too heavy to carry forever. I did not post about Eric online. I did not contact his clients. I did not try to ruin his reputation. I did not spend my energy making sure everyone knew what he had done. The people who needed to know already knew. The legal system had the documents. The financial records told the story. I did not need strangers choosing sides to prove my pain was real. I wanted something much simpler. I wanted the truth acknowledged. I wanted what belonged to me protected. I wanted the ability to make choices about my own future. For years, Eric had quietly written a version of my life without allowing me to read the pages. Now I was writing my own. The following spring, I did something I had delayed for almost a decade. I opened my own design company. Not a side business. Not something I worked on between supporting Eric's goals. A real company with my name on the door. The office was small. Much smaller than Eric's. It was located above a bookstore on a quiet street downtown. The floors were old hardwood, the windows needed replacing, and the heating system made strange noises every morning. I loved everything about it. On the first day, I stood alone in the empty room holding a cardboard box of samples, notebooks, and old sketches. For years, I had helped other people create spaces that represented who they were. Now I finally had one that represented me. The first contract I signed under my own company name was not large. A young couple wanted help redesigning their first home. The budget was modest. The project was simple, but when I signed the agreement, I stared at my name at the bottom of the page longer than necessary. No one else approved it. No one else managed the finances. No one else decided whether it was a smart move. It was mine. That feeling was unfamiliar and wonderful. Slowly, more projects came. A kitchen renovation, a boutique office, a historic home restoration. Clients recommended me to friends. My portfolio grew. The business became something more stable than I expected. For years, I had believed I was cautious because that was my personality. After the divorce, I realized I had been making myself smaller to fit inside a life where Eric always occupied the larger space. Independence was not just about money. It was about trusting my own judgment again. At home, I began making changes. Small ones at first. I moved the furniture. I painted the bedroom. I turned Eric's old office into a studio filled with fabric samples, drawings, plants, and sunlight. The room that once represented his work became the place where I created mine. One Saturday morning, I made coffee and carried the cup outside. For a moment, the habit felt strange. There had always been 2 cups, 2 chairs, 2 people discussing the day ahead. Now there was only one. But for the first time, the emptiness did not feel like something missing. It felt like space. Space to think. Space to breathe. Space where no secrets were hiding. I drank my coffee slowly. No phone was hidden under a pillow upstairs. No unexpected calls interrupted breakfast. No part of me was calculating whether a story matched something I had written in a notebook. Peace, I discovered, was not always happiness. Sometimes peace was simply the absence of fear. The black notebook stayed in my desk drawer. I did not throw it away. For months I thought about it. Part of me wanted to destroy it, to burn every page and remove every reminder of the worst period of my life. But eventually I understood that the notebook was not a symbol of Eric's betrayal. It was evidence of the moment I started trusting myself. The first page still contained the original entry, the date, the time, the first lie. The final page contained something different. A note I wrote after the divorce became official. I know the truth now. That is enough. 6 months after everything ended, I drove past Riverside Market. I had not planned to stop. I was on my way back from meeting a client when I saw the familiar sign on Elm Street. For a few seconds, I kept driving. Then I turned around. The parking lot looked exactly the same. That surprised me. It felt strange that a place connected to such a life-changing moment could remain completely ordinary. People pushed shopping carts. Cars searched for parking spaces. Someone hurried inside carrying a reusable bag. The world had continued. I sat in my car and remembered that day. The smell of fresh waffles near the entrance. The bright fluorescent lights. The 2 grocery bags in my hands. Waiting for Eric. 5 minutes. 10 minutes. 15. Then Frank's careful voice behind me. "Mrs. Adams, there is something I think you should see." At the time, I thought Frank had destroyed my life. For a while, the truth felt exactly like destruction. But I understood now that he had not taken anything from me. Eric's choices had already done that. Frank simply opened the door before I walked further into a future built on lies. I went inside. The store had changed slightly. New displays. Different arrangement. Fresh paint near the checkout area. But Frank was still there. He was helping a young employee organize shelves when he saw me. For a moment, he looked uncertain. Then he recognized me. "Stefania." I smiled. "Hi, Frank." His expression softened. "I wondered how you were doing." "I'm okay." He nodded slowly. "I'm glad." There was so much contained in those simple words. He did not ask for details. He did not ask what happened to Eric. He simply understood that whatever came after the truth was mine to share or keep. "I never thanked you properly," I said. Frank looked uncomfortable. "I only showed you what I thought you deserved to know." That changed everything. I was afraid it would. It did. I paused. But not in the way I thought. He studied my face. "I lost my marriage." "I'm sorry." "I'm not." The answer surprised both of us. I smiled slightly. "I'm sad about what happened, but I'm not sorry I found out." Frank looked down for a moment. "My wife used to say the truth hurts once. A lie hurts every day you continue living inside it." I remembered him telling me about her. The woman he lost. The truth he wished someone had given her sooner. "She was right," I said. When I left the store, I carried only one small bag. Nothing important. Coffee. Fruit. A loaf of bread. Ordinary things. But walking across that parking lot felt completely different from the last time. The first time I left carrying a secret that was about to break my life apart. This time I left carrying proof that I had survived it. People often imagine betrayal as one dramatic moment. A discovered message. A confession. A single, unforgivable mistake. Sometimes it is. But sometimes betrayal is quieter. It is hundreds of small decisions made in private. A hidden account. A changed password. A meeting explained with a false name. A future planned without the person who helped build the present. Eric's betrayal did not happen in one day. Neither did my recovery. Both were built one choice at a time. For a long while, I thought my silence during those weeks made me weak. Now I understand it differently. Sometimes silence is fear. But sometimes silence is patience. Sometimes waiting gives you the chance to see the whole truth instead of accepting the first explanation someone offers. I did not win against Eric. That was never the point. A divorce is not a competition where one person walks away victorious and the other defeated. What I won was something much more important. I won back the right to decide my own life. I won back trust in my instincts. I won back a future that someone else had been quietly designing without me. 19 years of marriage ended because I discovered the truth. But my life did not end with it. In many ways, that was where it finally began again.